Before we get started, give this video a like and subscribe if this kind of deep dive storytelling is your thing. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? December 12th, 1910. New York City, a winter's hush settles over the Upper East Side. The gray light of morning dying by slow degrees against the towers and rooftops of Gilded Age Manhattan. Cold air whips through the narrow gaps between brownstones, swirling last night's flurries around the boothfields of delivery boys and the stately carriages clattering down Fifth Avenue. Gas lamps flicker. A lone footman sweeps the step at 108 East 79th Street, the Arnold family residence, a townhouse of carved stone and stern, high windows, tucked among the elite. Inside, the city's day is already awakening with a kind of brittle uncertainty. On the third floor, in a room trimmed with pale wallpaper, Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold gazes into the looking glass. 25 years old, daughter of the American leisure class, she has the oval face and studied poise of a society photograph. Dark hair fixed just so, gray eyes restless, lips caught between resignation and defiance. Across the cool tile, sunlight crawls as she buttons her fur-collared coat. Outside, a city is opening itself, impervious to privilege or sadness, indifferent to the cares of a young woman. The world is poised, as yet unaware. This will be her last passage into daylight as Dorothy Arnold. Stateliness is routine in the Arnold household. Her father, Francis Arnold, a stern importer of fine goods, her mother, Mary, the custodian of etiquette and domestic order. Theirs is a home of unspoken rules and quiet competition, status maintained by silence and good public face. Yet Dorothy moves with a moodiness untypical for her station. She slips from her room and down the back stairs, preferring to avoid the front parlor. Maids exchange glances. She often walks alone, under various pretexts: shopping, posting manuscripts, exercise. Independence, in this family, is always seen as a kind of resistance. The city is not the comfortable playground her parents imagine. In 1910, New York thrums with contradictions, a metropolis of organdy and rags, tin horns and the hush of carriages, tenement fumes and the laughter of children skating over the frozen puddles of Central Park. Trolleys shriek and laborers cough in the morning streets. The wealthy, their world insulated by private car and social calendar, move along Fifth Avenue like phantoms against the noise. Dorothy's steps are quick, purposeful, carving a silent passage out of comfort and into uncertainty. She clutches her small handbag, presses gloved hands against the cold, feeling the pulse of something she cannot quite articulate. For all her elegant upbringing, education at Bryn Mawr, parties and suitors, there is a certain weight behind her eyes. It's the look of someone rehearsing her freedom, measuring the limits of what she can conceal. As she passes the doorman, he nods respectfully. She offers a brief, tight smile, then merges with the river of people flowing southward along the curb. This city, in December, is a world of interlocking circles. The poor hawk newspapers at the corners, stockbrokers hurry in topcoats, mothers shepherd children past shop displays trimmed in holiday tinsel. Overhead, store awnings flap in the breeze. Dorothy's dark hat and neat walking shoes are her only armor against the immensity of the city. She is neither remarkably tall nor especially striking, unless you catch a glimpse of her profile. Sharp, searching, a face built for questions. Across the avenue, a church bell rings, distant, muffled by the press of traffic. It is little remarked by those near her, but Dorothy pauses a moment, as though considering the hour. A trace of tension crosses her face. She smooths her coat, then hurries on. The air has that particular density of a city on the cusp of change. Holiday shoppers jostle on the sidewalk, nannies steer perambulators, a beggar murmurs at the gutter. The city is massive yet intimate. A single person could vanish without so much as a ripple. A few minutes later, she passes the Park and Tilford grocery, its windows radiant with chocolate boxes and candied fruit, enticements of the season. The bells on the door jangle as she steps inside. The clerk will later recall her composure, the polite way she ordered a half-pound of chocolates, Nothing out of the ordinary, just a well-dressed young woman running a simple errand. But beneath Dorothy's civility is a profound interior disquiet, a tension that no one around her sees. Even the city's wealthiest corners can be lonely places. For women of her class, independence is a careful rebellion, and each day is measured against expectations, family, marriage, decorum. Dorothy writes stories in secret, manuscripts tucked away, mostly rejected by the magazines she admires. The taste of disappointment is familiar, educated past most men's comfort. She finds herself stifled by the narrow chambers of privilege. A snow flurry sweeps past as she exits the store and continues down Fifth Avenue. Her coat is drawn tighter now, her breathing steady. She is seen by a handful of witnesses. The clerk, a passing acquaintance, another society woman she nods to without breaking stride. The pattern of her day is unremarkable, except for its growing sense of finality. The city moves around her in layers. Delivery wagons rattle, horses clop, newsboys shout from the curb. To the east, Central Park glimmers, trees stripped to their bones, the stone arches layered with ice. Dorothy could have taken any number of routes that day, but she proceeds south, into the heart of Manhattan's mercantile district. Her footsteps echo, barely noticed in the melee of commerce and celebration. Each detail, each step, will be dissected in the days to come. Yet at this moment, she is only another soul afloat in the city, present and unremarked. Back home, the Arnold household runs with the measured efficiency of a minor court, staff polished and ready. The dining table laid for Mrs. Arnold's tea, letters stacked neatly on the console. Dorothy has told her mother she is shopping for a new dress at the fashionable Wilcox and Gibbs. But there is no set meeting, only the vague expectation of her return by afternoon. The day's schedule, so ordinary, conceals the possibility of fracture. Inside, a maid straightens Dorothy's room, pausing to note the orderly arrangement of her writing desk, papers, a rejection letter from the Century magazine, a faded rose in a glass. There are no signs of flight, no crumpled clothing, no cryptic messages, just faint traces of perfume, the stillness of something interrupted. Outside, Dorothy passes Brentano's bookstore, a favored haunt. The clerk, Mr. Simmons, will later recall her bright greeting and her choice. Engaged in light conversation, selected a volume of humorous essays, seemed quite herself. He could not know that this would be the final verification of her presence, that soon her name would travel headlines as disappeared, New York's favorite word for those lost beneath its surface. The city's clock ticks, a cathedral chime carried over rooftops. In the Arnold house, time creeps. Midday, then half past, then the first touch of unease as the shadows lengthen. By this hour, Dorothy should be home, her absence a pebble in the still pond of routine. Her mother waits, smoothing her gloves, checking the window. The house is kept warm against the coming dark, but inside, there is a growing chill. The woman who walked out this morning, a sum of education, disappointment, yearning, will not walk back in. It is a fact unknown to those who love her, unmarked by the city itself. The only witnesses are the streets, the snow, the indifferent scurry of the metropolis. A single footstep vanishes among thousands. In this way, the shadow of Dorothy Arnold extends, a young woman's passage from light to darkness, from the certainty of place to the ache of absence. By dusk, the city is a tapestry of light and cold, streetcars glowing in the wintry gloam, lamps painting gold halos on the frozen sidewalks. Dorothy's disappearance is not yet known, not yet named, but it has already begun to hollow out the day, to haunt the hallways and quiet rooms where she was last seen, to unsettle the fabric of a world that believed itself impervious to tragedy. Soon, all of New York will know her name. But for this moment, this vanishing hour, she is simply gone, folded into the city's December shadows, leaving only the specter of a question that will never truly be settled. Where did Dorothy Arnold go? In the feathery half-light of an Edwardian Manhattan morning, the city's upper echelon moves as if choreographed. Drivers tip their hats at every carriage. Boots click across marble vestibules. Inside 108 East 79th Street, the Arnold family estate stands like an ornate fortress, its burgundy velvet curtains heavy with the scent of privilege and time. Here, each portrait is an anchor to another era, every silver candlestick a token of Solomon Arnold's mercantile rise, a fortune that arrived just before the Vanderbilt age, setting the Arnolds in that rarefied circle of old New York. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold, born July 1st, 1885, is their second child and eldest daughter, a living embodiment of this careful prestige. Her name, which fills invitations and debut columns, sits gently among the Astors and Livingstons, the silent majority of Manhattan's 400. In these wood-paneled parlors, social standing requires daily rehearsal. Every word and gesture a calculated performance passed down through generations. From childhood, Dorothy's world has been one of hushed drawing rooms and echoing ballrooms, French tutors, and operatic matinees. Her laugh, when permitted, is something like snowfall in June, rare, a little shocking. To be an Arnold means to be exemplary. No missteps, no drama, certainly no headlines. Dorothy has observed her mother's smooth skill at excluding scandal with a chilly handshake, her father's shield of reserve, his casual lighting of imported cigars over contracts signed on the shop floors of Lower Manhattan. Dorothy's own struggles, her desires, her disappointments, are camouflaged beneath layers of social expectation. The city outside is changing. Women are fighting for the vote, swelling the workforce. The automobile thunders its challenge at the horse and carriage. But inside the Arnold house, the rules remain unyielding. A daughter is a mirror of the family legacy, not an author of her own story. Yet, behind each carefully arranged bow and demure smile, Dorothy wages a quiet rebellion, one most never saw or never allowed themselves to see. Her ambition is not to marry well, secure alliances, or enhance the Arnold standing. She craves something more ephemeral and, in her family's eyes, preposterous, to be a writer. Words are her true inheritance, the space where longing and observation find shape. At 18, Dorothy is sent, not to the continent, but to Bryn Mawr, one of the rare sanctums for ambitious young women in America. It is there, outside the orbit of her father's city, that she begins to discover her own mind. Dormitory debates lasting until dawn, professors encouraging skeptical essays, the soft, startled pleasure of sharing work aloud. On the weekends, she retreats to quiet campus nooks with a notebook, composing stories of Manhattan salons. Sharp, satirical, intent on the loneliness careful privilege breeds. Returning from Bryn Mawr to the Arnold mansion feels like stepping behind a screen of glass. In the city's drawing rooms, Dorothy is hailed as an intellectual, one of their own reared on culture and discretion. Her accomplishments, published school essays, college prizes, are mentioned almost apologetically to visitors. It's as if real achievement must always be whispered, never claimed. At society dinners, her quick wit is tempered by caution. Discussion is confined to the safety of literature, the arts, the doings of mutual friends. The men talk business, the women dresses. Dorothy's mind aches for greater engagement. Her father, Francis, confides to a friend that Dorothy is clever enough, too clever at times, his tone at once proud and weary. She sends stories, carefully revised, typewritten, off to magazines, McClure's, Harper's, and, most longingly, The Century. Her fiction returns with thin, formulaic rejection slips, the sort that rarely offers so much as a proper sentence. There are days she paces her room, rereading drafts, scanning for weakness, wondering if the prose itself is faulty or if her address, her name, is somehow to blame. Rejection gnaws, but so too does bitterness. Each manuscript returned feels like a taste of her true place in the world, allowed to observe, never to participate. Her family is bemused by her aspirations. It is not necessary for a young lady in your position to earn a livelihood, Francis Arnold reminds her, his words clipped. Dorothy's attempts to explain, her love of literature, her sense of calling, are met with polite smiles from her mother. strained silence from her father. It is not anger so much as confusion. The Arnolds, like many of their class, are unprepared for a daughter who seeks to define herself outside of pedigree and marriage. Manhattan's literary scene is experiencing an awakening. Bohemian enclaves form in downtown cafes. Poets perform at new salons. Suffragists march along the same sidewalks where Dorothy walks to Brentano's. These are places where class boundaries fray, even collapse. But for Dorothy, participation comes at a cost. Appearance is everything. To be seen at the wrong gathering, or with the wrong company, would invite scrutiny, perhaps even familial censure. Nevertheless, Dorothy frequents these circles when she can. Sometimes, under the pretext of shopping for books or calling on old-school friends, she attends readings, mingling quietly, drinking in the eager energy. Hosts in fashionable apartments greet her as Miss Arnold of the Arnolds, a living monument to the city's social architecture. Within these rooms, she discovers both kinship and isolation. Kinship with young artists and thinkers, isolation because she is, fundamentally, not quite one of them. Their struggle is for survival, hers for meaning. Family portraits line the halls at 108 East 79th. Generations of Arnolds, men in starched collars, women in silks. Dorothy studies their faces as she passes, wondering what ambitions they surrendered, what secrets they disguised beneath the solemnity of oil and canvas. In their eyes, she seeks reassurance, or maybe permission, to desire something else. Social engagements are endless. Balls, teas, charity events, luncheons. The invitations crowd the marble-topped bureau in Dorothy's room. She attends because it is expected, dresses because it is required, but her spirit chafes at the enforced gaiety. Her closest friend, Elsie Henry, another Bryn Mawr graduate, senses this unease. "You were meant for a different kind of life, Dorothy," she once whispers at a dance, their hands briefly brushing as shields against the crowd. Dorothy only smiles. Wry, a touch resigned. Suitors are inevitable. Dorothy's older brother, John, is married and proving his prowess in the family business. Her own prospects are the fodder of countless quiet conversations. A lawyer's son here, a banker's nephew there, each vetted for bearing, fortune, and discretion. Dorothy, for her part, is polite but distant. The courtship ritual, a theater of exchanges and slyly coded glances, exhausts her. In private, she pens acerbic sketches of her would-be beaus, sometimes lampooning herself as the city's most accomplished disappointment. Beneath the surface, a deeper anxiety grows, the loneliness particular to those who have every material comfort but not the freedom to choose. Dorothy's days are structured, predictable, the calendar of the privileged. Yet the city outside is in flux. The papers bring stories of progress, airplanes, suffragists, tenements. Dorothy reads them hungrily, making notes for future stories she hopes will someday sell. Still, her family's hopes rest on continuity, not change. Her father is away often, overseeing business affairs, returning with tales of shipments and tariffs and profits. Her mother hosts musicales. Her younger siblings are groomed for similar fates. Dorothy, eldest daughter, is the linchpin, a symbol meant to secure the family's future with a marriage as carefully arranged as the table settings at Sunday supper. In the privacy of her journal, Dorothy records her thoughts. She writes of yearning, frustration, her confusion at finding herself so complicit in a script she would rather escape. "Is this all my life shall hold?" she scrawls one evening, her pen shaking. A bright face for a family photograph, and stories too slight for even the magazines. There are secrets the family does not discuss. Whispered stories of women who left after scandalous affairs or sudden breakdowns. Cousins banished to Europe for reasons unspoken. Dorothy's rebellion is subtler, but more dangerous for its ambiguity. She is both participant and skeptic, beloved and vexing. A daughter who cannot, will not, simply be the role she was born into. The pressure ratchets up as the city's pulse ticks louder as late morning unfolds. Fifth Avenue shimmering with the early promise of sun after so many dim, cold weeks. Dorothy Arnold moves with apparent purpose, her steps brisk among the shifting crowds, her silhouette framed by fur and velvet and the restless swirl of Manhattan days before Christmas. Beneath temple shadows, cab wheels splash arcs of slush, bells shiver on streetcars weaving past policemen and flower vendors. It is an ordinary day for most. For Dorothy, this day is marked not by spectacle, but by small, deliberate choices. At Park and Tilford, the glass doors open with a soft chime, ushering Dorothy out of the wintry street and into light and fragrance. The heady perfume of candied fruits, the faint breath of vanilla and chocolate from crystal bowls lining the counter. This is a fashionable fixture among the city's upper echelons, where the privileged come to indulge discreetly, where reputations glide along the glass as lightly as cashmered hands. Dorothy waits in line, her gloved fingertips pressed against the seams of her purse. "Good morning, miss," comes the store clerk, not much older than she but deferential, as every clerk in Manhattan is taught to be with a lady of means. "How may I help you?" Dorothy's answer is polite, composed, her voice marked by Bryn Mawr clarity, yet softened with something practiced. "A half-pound box, milk chocolates, please." "It's for Mother," she adds as if rehearsed, the words blending into the gentle music of commerce. She watches as the clerk selects a gold foil box, slips bright sweets into crinkled paper, and wraps the package in a ribbon the color of rose petals. It is, by all appearances, a minor act, easily forgotten. Names are exchanged only in the ledger. Dorothy Arnold, 108 East 79th. There is nothing unusual in her bearing, nothing in the quick, bright flash of her smile, except a sense, barely perceptible, of someone measuring their own edges, rehearsing self-assurance. She steps again into the stream of New York, swept up in the forward press of holiday rush. It is nearing 1 in the afternoon now. Shadows grow crisp along the avenue. Dorothy's figure, erect and composed, weaves gracefully between shoppers laden with parcels, nannies wrangling children, newsboys hawking the midday extra. Election reform. Governor responds. The noise and velocity of the city swirl around her, and yet she seems untouched, almost floating, contained within her purpose. Later, in tragedy's aftermath, investigators and family would probe these mundane transactions, searching for a trace of distraction or despair. But clerks and shopgirls would recall her cheer. She was perfectly natural, more cheerful than usual. One would swear to police reporters, bewildered at the idea such a woman could simply vanish. Her route leads, by habit and intention, past the polished windows of Brentano's, the city's most renowned bookstore. Inside, afternoon sun turns the stacks to gold and shadow, catching the glint of new bindings and speckles of dust in the hush. Dorothy knows these shelves intimately. She has browsed them dozens of times since school, lingers by the tables where new volumes stand displayed with intention. Walter Pater's essays, Twain's wit, the latest Pear's soap advertisement wedged into the periodicals. A familiar clerk is attending the register, his sleeves rolled, spectacles perched precariously on a nose made for waiting and peering. He greets Dorothy with recognition, but not surprise. Their exchanges are a ritual. He knows her as a promising young lady with a taste for satire and travel. Neither of them could possibly know this will be the last remembered moment, the last brush of Dorothy Arnold's life among the living, accounted for in a city ledger. "May I help you, Miss Arnold?" he offers, with the proprietary pride of someone who caters to money and intellect alike. "Yes," Dorothy answers warmly. "I should like to purchase the latest volume of humorous essays. Recommend something light, please. Something to make even my father laugh." She smiles, a flash of self-awareness in her eyes, the sort of smile traded only among the disappointed and the knowing. The clerk fetches a slender book, an engaged girl's sketches, or perhaps a Mark Twain reprint, details forever indistinct in later police files, and shows it to her with a flourish. Dorothy examines the title, runs her gloved thumb across the embossed spine. With practiced ease, she accepts the purchase, opens her small beaded bag, removes the coin, and transacts the business of the day. Again, nothing remarkable, nothing out of character in the gentle air of banter, the bright note of gratitude. When he later describes her, her poise, her good manners, her witticism about enlightening my father, he cannot recall a single detail out of place. No tension, no fear, no hit, as some would later theorize, a frantic concealment. For all the headlines to come, for all the agony and rumor, her last confirmed moments are curiously serene, observed by strangers whose memory is sharpened only by tragedy. It is now 1:45 p.m. Dorothy exits Brentano's, clutching her new book beneath one arm, the pink ribbon chocolate box swinging lightly from the other. Above, rows of brownstone and marble shimmer in cold sunlight. She pauses at the curb, turns south, merging with the swelling tide of city dwellers. No one would have marked the moment. A young woman, well-dressed, walking in the heart of civilization, visible, reassuringly normal, quietly vanishing into the city that shaped her. For the rest of that afternoon, New York remains oblivious. Clerks tidy their counters, children clamor for peppermints, streetcars rattle on. In a matter of hours, Dorothy will not arrive for tea as promised. In hours more, her family's anxieties will gather like thunder behind silk curtains. But for now, what the Capitol records reflect is simply this. An heiress purchased chocolates and a comic book, smiled and made small talk, and then continued down Fifth Avenue, a figure stepping behind the curtain of the ordinary into the unknowable. This is how the city remembers her, poised, contained, surface bright. Beneath that surface, however, critical questions begin to smolder. What thoughts moved behind her calm eyes as she wandered from counter to counter, from books to bonbons? Did she suspect that these errands were to be her last? Did she sense, on the edge of everything, the approach of a story no one would ever finish? Polite, untroubled. So it seems. New York, December 12, 1910. Afternoon draws long and golden across the city's roof lines, their stone faces warmed by a haze that softens the chill but sharpens the day's pace. At street level, the world is a living collage, shoppers clutching parcels with gloved hands, delivery boys weaving through a thicket of pedestrians, red-cheeked vendors hawking holly bundles by the curb. The city's pulse is quick, as if every soul senses the approach of something electric. A tingle in the air, the great quiet before snow. Dorothy Arnold threads into this teeming, indifferent tide, her figure alone among so many, hands wrapped close around her parcels, the gold-foiled chocolates for her mother, the slim new book for herself. Clad in a tailored coat and a fashionable hat, broad-brimmed, ornamented with a single vivid ribbon, she does not invite stares. Her clothing is impeccable, her carriage confident but subdued. For the shopkeepers who moments before exchanged small courtesies with her, Dorothy is simply young, pleasant, reassuringly proper. The shape of her day has mirrored hundreds of others along Fifth Avenue. Errands performed, manners observed, family obligations quietly met. If she feels, even faintly, that she is marking a threshold, if her step hesitates for the span of a breath as she merges with the crowd, no witness ever remarks upon it. In the city, a glance is a private thing, almost never shared. Fifth Avenue seethes. The clop of carriage horses, the metallic whine of trolleys, the tinny shuffle of music boxes. Every note forms a symphony of movement. Dorothy passes by spangled shop windows, their displays saturated with the promise of a modern Christmas, stacked toys, technicolor ornaments, cakes in the shapes of holly leaves. To her left, a woman in a peacock-plumed hat gathers children against her skirts, their laughter trailing up through the damp air. To her right, a lawyer's assistant hurries past, head bent over a slip of yellow telegram paper. Between worlds, Dorothy moves as if between lines in a book, present, yet somehow removed, her mind elsewhere. Some witnesses will later recall a woman matching her description striding past 27th Street, face set in gentle determination, eyes trained on the distance, as if the avenue itself might open and reveal whatever secret she is chasing. Others, spooling the memory backward through newspaper haze, will swear she seemed at ease, almost serene, neither hurried nor hesitant, simply content to fold herself into the city's living fabric. Yet none of these recollections are precise. In the moment, Dorothy was just one more figure among many. She does not look over her shoulder. She does not pause beside the streetcar, does not flag down a hansom cab. There is no premonition, no dramatic tableau, just the measured cadence of a young woman's stride, confident and assured, undisturbed by all but the ordinary. The world closes behind her, cotton-wrapped and humming, the city's vast machinery unconcerned. Shop doors open and close, knitting the seams of the blocks shut. Pedestrians spill around Dorothy like water flowing around a stone, minutes and bodies passing, anonymous and relentless. A silent film plays in the open air. A photographer with a box camera adjusts his lens in the icy light. Two men in derby hats quarrel gently over the price of a fresh pine, seen so carefully mundane that any one of them could swallow a person whole. Dorothy, bright-hatted and proud, is a flicker at the edge of vision. Forensic certainties will later unspool what is known. Dorothy Arnold was last seen at approximately 2 p.m. walking south on Fifth Avenue, mingling with well-dressed holiday shoppers near 27th Street. There is no report of distress, no anxious glances, no attempts at pursuit or flight. She was, to all accounts, a young woman amid the living tide, without care or concern. In hindsight, every ordinary detail becomes monumental. The ribbon on her hat, the set of her shoulders, the absence of haste, all are given meaning, pressed into service by families desperate for clues, by detectives who must extract drama from the ordinary. She seemed perfectly satisfied, one supposed witness later reports. In no way was she discomposed. If anything, she looked as though she belonged exactly where she was. But the city is a vast and different thing. Its tendernesses are small and private, its cruelties cold and gigantic. No one marks the moment Dorothy Arnold disappears, not truly. No one shouts her name across the avenue. No one drops a hand on her arm to remind her of home and safety. The crowd swallows her as easily as December swallows the sunlight, without remark, without a ripple, without even the faintest flutter of pause. In that instant, possibility expands to fill every silence. The possibility that she took a cab downtown, met with a friend, wandered into some quiet cafe to warm herself. The possibility, too, that she vanished by choice, stepping out of herself like someone stepping across a threshold, the city's anonymity her only accomplice. Or that in some ordinary instant, her life was quietly, decisively undone, fate pressing in beneath the bright surge of Christmas lights, the clamor of commerce, the hush of falling dusk. It is this moment, this silent vanishing, unrehearsed and unremarked, that will rip open the fabric of a family, then a city, then a nation. In the coming days, detectives and family members will paw through every possible trace. They will map out her last known trajectory. They will summon up imagined witnesses from the crowded den, will meditate on the ordinary rituals of a December day, and turn each into an omen. But the truth, monstrous and simple, is this. Dorothy Arnold was last seen walking south on Fifth Avenue, her bright hat bobbing in the procession, loved and ordinary, known and unknown, never to be glimpsed again. A city, swarming, pitiless, closes behind her. The pale December sun weakens as it slits behind Manhattan's spires, and a gray hush settles over East 79th Street. By mid-afternoon, the city's brilliance wanes, giving way to the heavy quiet of early nightfall, when the world feels at once enormous and unbearably small. In the Arnold home, shadows stretch across the parquet floor, settling between the candelabra and heavy gilt mirrors, each tick of the clock echoing a little too loudly in the grand silence. Within these walls, routines are as carefully measured as silverware. Dinner is set for 6, the table laid beneath flickering crystal, each place prepared for its proper occupant. In the drawing room, Mrs. Mary Arnold glances at the ormolu clock atop the mantel, a subtle frown touching her lips. Dorothy, Punctual by habit, though sometimes distracted if lost in reverie or manuscript, should have returned by now. The warmth of the house contrasts sharply with the encroaching cold, but a chill of a different kind has begun to gather amidst the tapestries. As servants finish their preparations, the city outside enters its evening transformation. Horse-drawn cabs ferry holiday revelers to distant theaters, while shopkeepers snuff the last lamps in their display windows. The world beyond the Arnold threshold becomes indistinct and unknowable, hemmed in by fog, drifting flakes, and the murmured footfalls of unseen passers-by. The city feels like a snow globe shaken by an indifferent hand, fragments of light and shadow swirling, no one aware that a young woman, one of their own, has not yet come home. Inside, Mrs. Arnold, her movements serene but eyes alert, begins to stir with anxiety she is careful not to show. Dorothy, she reminds herself, is grown, certainly able to manage an afternoon in the city. But the hour creeps late. She listens from the vestibule for the sound of familiar steps, the soft invocation of a latch key in the front door, Dorothy's characteristic greeting, half formal, half amused. Nothing. Only the faint flutter of curtains, the muted clatter of a tray in the next room. Habit casts a spell of control. Perhaps Dorothy was delayed at Wilcox and Gibbs. Mrs. Arnold suggests as much to herself as to the housekeeper. Yet as daylight fades, she feels a growing unease, a silent protest from somewhere deep inside. The family's cook, Mrs. Hadley, peers through the frosted glass before returning to the warmth of the kitchen. The maids whisper softly in the hall, unsure whether to worry or dismiss their mistress's unspoken tension. With gentle discretion, Mary Arnold instructs a servant to telephone the homes of Dorothy's close friends. The apparatus hums, a mechanical, brittle thing, and voices rise and fall in the muffled backdrop. "No, I haven't seen her today, Mrs. Arnold." "Yes, she mentioned shopping earlier this week." "No, she hadn't called." Each answer is unsatisfying in its ordinariness. Respectable people in respectable homes, puzzled but unworried, cannot imagine danger falling upon someone like Dorothy. Not in this neighborhood, not in this family. The routine continues, but with less certainty now. The table is reset, silverware adjusted and readjusted until it gleams, the roast cooling beneath its domed cover. Mr. Francis Arnold returns from his club at the appointed hour, spots empty at the table, and only then does a sharper tension cloud the air. "She's likely lost track of time," he mutters, his voice gruff, more for the reassurance of those around him than from true conviction. Still, the city's winter dark presses forward, thin fingers of chill air probing the edges of every window, the gaslights outside flickering as though in warning. Time in the Arnold house loses its shape. Minutes expand and contract, paranoia and composure looping in a slow, silent dance. The family gathers in the drawing room, conversations stilted and empty, every ear tuned to the creak of the stairs, the suggestive hush of wheels at the curb. As the hour draws on, Mrs. Arnold's anxieties become undeniable. She gives gentle instructions. "Make another call, if you please," her voice contained but urgent. Neighbors are queried, but with a delicacy born of social standing. "Has young Miss Arnold stopped by?" a discreet maid inquires. "Perhaps she lingered at the Foot or Washburn home?" "No, not since last Sunday," comes each reply. "No, not today." Outside, the city takes no notice. Manhattan is a living thrum of comings and goings, its scale beyond the comprehension of a single family's worry. Yet inside, the Arnold home feels strangely suspended, like a ship becalmed before a storm. Every ritual, tea, the winding of the clock, the stoking of the parlor fire, takes on the quality of a vigil. Every shadow becomes a herald of something out of joint. As the night swells, thoughts veer toward the unspeakable. Mrs. Arnold tries to subdue the image of Dorothy, distracted and smiling, of her promises to return, each memory now sliced by doubt. "Perhaps she slipped on the ice," she whispers later to her husband, searching his face for reassurance. Perhaps she remembered an engagement, yet her words are brittle, hollow, bound by the iron ring of fear. The hours advance, one after the other, as the city outside recedes into total darkness. In the Arnold drawing room, tea cools in its pot. The clock chimes 9:30, then 10, then 10:30. Dorothy's absence stretches, tightening around heart and home with every passing moment. Above, in her pristine bedroom, her writing desk remains serenely ordered, papers stacked, inkwells full. It is as if she has only just stepped out and will return at any moment. But as the lamps burn lower and the house grows still, hope slips quietly into despair. By midnight, Mrs. Arnold can bear it no longer. Formalities fall away and fear curdles into certainty. With trembling composure, she instructs the coachman to search nearby, to ask among cabmen and street vendors. Perhaps she is stranded, perhaps she is ill, she says, more to herself than to anyone else. The master of the house, stoic until now, withdraws behind the morning paper, his face pale, hands tight on the print, old terrors stirring in the ancestral blood. Still, there is no Dorothy. No message, no explanation, nothing but the slow press of cold and the distant city lights twinkling like lost hopes through the frost-streaked glass. The city's winter dark presses at the windows, silent and inexorable. The Arnold home, usually a bastion of order and confidence, is consumed by a yawning uncertainty it cannot name or dispel. Down quiet halls and across marble floors, attention moves. Worry turned fear, fear turned a knot so tight it threatens to strangle words before they can be spoken. Now, every knock at the door is electric with possibility. Every ring of the telephone a summons from the monstrous unknown. When dawn finally arrives, it brings no clarity. The house wakes to find Dorothy's bed untouched, her gloves still in their drawer, her perfume lingering in the halls. A missing daughter, a night without easing. The city glitters beyond the windows, cold and immense, as yet untouched by the shadow now grown to fill not just a home, but the fragile heart of an entire family. The first night without Dorothy crept by in fractured silences, the Arnold home straining beneath a new gravity, unnameable, insistent, a fear that would not be spoken above a whisper. Morning sunlight, feeble and gray, did not dispel the dread but made it starker, drawing long shadows across the parquet. Eleanor the housemaid had waited up all night, listening for any disturbance in the street, any turning of the latch, but none came. For Mary and Francis Arnold, pride ran as deep as worry. The Arnolds were no ordinary family. Their wealth was a slow accumulation of generations, their status cemented by marriages, investments, and unbroken appearances at every club and social circle that mattered. In New York, to court scandal was unthinkable. For their daughter to disappear, even in what might prove to be some misunderstanding, would mean, at best, whispered pity and, at worst, headlines and humiliation. Thus, their first instinct was not to summon the nearest precinct, but to activate the private, privileged mechanisms available only to their kind. On the morning of December 13th, Francis Arnold placed a call, not to the police, but to Pinkerton's National Detective Agency. A man of his standing would brook no delay, and the Pinkertons responded swiftly, dispatching detectives skilled in discretion and accustomed to the peculiar sensitivities of society families. There would be no uniforms, no patrolmen tramping through the parlor, no sensational questions. Instead, there were soft inquiries and note-taking in the dim privacy of Mr. Arnold's study. As the fire guttered and the city's noise felt a million miles away. Not a word to the newspapers, Francis Arnold insisted. We will handle this as befits our name. The Pinkertons, men in plain suits with neutral expressions, spread across Manhattan like shadows. Their methods were methodical, unhurried. Ferry terminals were checked for bookings matching Dorothy's age and description. Railway ticket agents were questioned, their logs examined for Miss Arnold or any lady traveling alone that afternoon. At city hospitals, private detectives inquired about unidentified women admitted after accidents. Hotel porters and desk clerks, ever the confidants of secret assignations, were asked in guarded terms whether any well-dressed young woman had checked in without a chaperone. Each conversation required the finest balance: urgency without alarm, concern without confession. To ask directly if a Miss Arnold had vanished risked stirring up talk that might leap, wildfire-like, into the columns of the city's ravenous press. Instead, Pinkertons worked backward from routine lists and favored discretion, their questions bent by the gravity of Arnold money and the linguistic convolutions of upper-class discretion. Francis Arnold, though outwardly composed and in control, was devoured by private panic. He spared no expense, signing generous retainers and promising bonuses should Dorothy be found. He told confidants, under a vow of secrecy, not the slightest hint of trouble must escape these walls. His wife, Mary, alternated between brittle composure in the drawing room and pure anguish behind the bedroom door. She clung to fading hope. Perhaps her daughter had suffered a fainting spell. Perhaps she'd slipped and been struck by amnesia, cared for anonymously in some hospital ward. The Arnolds quietly expanded their inquiries, involving a circle of trusted family lawyers, club acquaintances, and servants bound by loyalty as much as paycheck. Some carried Dorothy's photograph, discreetly shown in back offices and carriage stables. Notes were quietly exchanged among debutante mothers, the language always careful. If you hear anything, do let me know. Dorothy's been missing an appointment or two, and we begin to worry. Reporters, sensing that something was awry in the Arnold house, a flutter of staff, unusual comings and goings, began making their inquiries. The Arnolds responded as their class always had, with straight-backed silence and gentle rebuff. Mr. Arnold himself stood at the threshold one morning, his face carved from disapproval. "You are mistaken. My daughter is well. We have no news for you," he declared, his tone final. Inside, telephone lines hummed with carefully coded messages, and the family's lawyer, Mr. Samuel Bernard, took turns screening potential callers, warding off gossip with the practiced skill of a man who had witnessed scandals handled and smothered. With every passing day, the Pinkertons' search grew broader and more desperate. Yet publicity was still their greatest fear. The very tools that might have galvanized an army of New Yorkers, the handbills, the blaring headlines, the city's nosy attention, were, in the Arnold mind, to be avoided at all cost. They feared not only humiliation, but ruination. What if Dorothy had done something imprudent, something that would see her name coupled with disgrace? All over New York, the detectives slipped through ferry terminals and train stations, checked guest lists at private hotels, and slipped bribes into the hands of night porters just in case a young lady had checked in under an assumed name. City hospitals, both public and private, were examined with a fine-toothed comb. They traced every possible errand and acquaintance. Dorothy's friends, respectable girls from Bryn Mawr, the daughters of fellow businessmen, were visited and questioned, but no one knew of any plan, no rendezvous. None had seen her since she left home the previous morning. Family servants revisited her room, searching for any note, ticket stub, or telltale clue that might suggest a destination or secret sorrow. Discreet messages went up and down the social ladder, and even midway through December, with the holiday rush electrifying every corner of the city, there was a curious undertone in certain parlors and clubs. Have you heard? The Arnolds are concerned about their girl. Yet outside these circles, no hint of scandal reached the rumor-hungry press. Days passed in tight, anxious increments. Dorothy's absence grew longer and all the more inexplicable. Still, the family would not risk exposure. A missing persons report to the authorities, fully public, might as well be an admittance of failure, a first crack in the armor of Arnold pride. Panic grew, hidden in velvet and mahogany, but grew all the same. Francis Arnold increased the reward for credible leads and hired more private men. Detectives even discreetly checked the city's morgues, scanning the nameless and unclaimed. Yet no face, no body, no injury matched Dorothy's description. Hotel ledgers were pored over by candlelight, train manifests double-checked, hospital intake logs scrutinized for clerical errors or aliases. As Christmas approached, the city rushed onward as if nothing had changed. Its shops brimmed with gifts, its restaurants with laughter. But in the Arnold home, joy withered, replaced by a tense and festering hope. Dorothy's bedroom remained untouched. Her mother saw to it herself, ready for a homecoming that never came. The press, rebuffed at every turn, grew hungry for any hint. An editor from the Times arrived one afternoon, armed with tact and a notepad, but left with nothing for his front page. It would be weeks yet before the story leaked, and when it did, it would arrive as a storm. The city finally learning what the Arnold family tried so fiercely to keep hidden, that even the safest home on the best street could be hollowed by loss, and that privilege by silence, but not safety. For now, the official story was one of absence without explanation, a young woman missing, and no one, not family nor detective, willing to name aloud what they most feared. The formalities of the secret search wore themselves thin as the days turned over. First anxiety, then dread, then the growing fatigue of hope deferred. By the week's end, Dorothy's absence had become a terse whisper in every room, a presence that pressed against the wallpaper and weighed down every silence. The shell of her daily routine, empty ever since she set out that bright December morning, grew more ghostly and unsettling. Detectives returned often to her bedroom, that carefully proportioned, tidily feminine space on the house's third floor. Dorothy's world here seemed, at first glance, undisturbed. Pins in a china tray, gloves stacked neatly, her writing desk organized to the point of sterility. The only outward concession to private longing was a solitary pressed flower under glass, a whisper from summertime, now embalmed by winter light. Yet on one of those cold, terse mornings, a detective, Mr. Kelly, Pinkerton's man, knelt by the tiled hearth, frowning at what he first mistook for the residue of someone burning old correspondence or household bills. Among the cold, gray ashes lay several blackened shreds of paper, charred but not wholly consumed. He sifted delicately, gloved fingers separating the friable edges, his mind already parsing the grim piquancy of burned letters in a vanished woman's room. He gathered the fragments as evidence and set them before Dorothy's father, Francis Arnold. Together, grim-faced, they pored over the remaining text, deciphering what scraps survived on the singed paper. One incomplete heading was unmistakable in type: Century Magazine, editorial office. Another, more ragged, bore the closing of an impersonal rejection. Regret, not suitable, perhaps at a later date. There was more, bits of typewriting, sentences stripped of context by the fire, yet deeply revelatory. Phrases lingered. The silence of the crowded room pressed on Miriam. She watched as the world moved past her, unseen, unchosen. These were not merely burnt correspondence, but remnants of Dorothy's private stories, dashed off in the hope of literary acclaim and returned, again and again, with the indifferent language of rejection. For Francis Arnold, this discovery cut deeply, deeper, perhaps, than he could allow himself to admit. He had always regarded Dorothy's writing ambitions as eccentric, even naive, a harmless preoccupation for a privileged young woman. Yet now, sifting through ashes cooled days before, one could not help but wonder what had driven his daughter to this minor act of erasure. Was it disappointment? Was it shame? To the Pinkerton men, the burned fiction appeared first as a possible clue. That Dorothy may have departed in a spirit of melancholy or despair, her latest literary efforts spurned, her dreams narrowed by another impersonal turn down from the world she so yearned to join. But artists have always burned their work for reasons more tangled than defeat: pride, embarrassment, fear of parents reading intimate dreams rendered in fiction. Was it melancholy, or simply the fleeting drama of youth? One rejected story bore a date, November 15th. She had received the response less than a month before she vanished. In the ashes, detectives found not one, but several fragments with the same hand, same rhythm, scenes of misunderstood young women, family misunderstandings, so many silent departures. One sentence, struck Mr. Kelly as loaded. I wish to go where no one knows me, to walk out among the living unnamed. It might have been merely fiction or confession. Mary Arnold, when told, brushed away the matter with a tight, defensive calm. Dorothy often burned her drafts rather than let them clutter her desk. She hated untidiness, and besides, those were private, childish stories. Yet the mere presence of these ashes became a point of friction between family and investigators. To the Arnolds, it was a private idiosyncrasy, a detail easily overinterpreted by people outside their class or experience. To the Pinkertons, hungry for pattern and meaning, it was perhaps the first fissure in Dorothy's shining facade. Was there, beneath her composure, the desperate loneliness and creative frustration so often named after vanished daughters? Was this the emotional logic, the path, somewhere between shame and despair, that might lead a young woman to run or break? The stories themselves, what little survived, shared a tone, fine-grained observations of girls on the edge of respectable society, daughters ill at ease with the table rounds and suffocating obligations of their class. Some descriptions felt almost like diary entries transfigured, the anxiety of watching one's own reflection become unrecognizable, the ache for adventure in a city of locked drawing rooms, the dread that one's voice would be drowned out by 10,000 others. The family insisted this was literary affectation, nothing more. Her stories were always so romantic, so exaggerated, said her younger sister, Marjorie, when questioned. Dorothy was embarrassed by her rejections, but she never let them trouble her for long. She only wished father might let her try again. Yet in these denials something raw flickered, a defensiveness as much about the boundaries of respectability as genuine disbelief in Dorothy's melancholy. Was this fireplace evidence of a coming storm, or simply the detritus of creative privacy? Did Dorothy burn her work in a moment of bitter resolve, humiliating defeat, or simply the restless cycles of a young woman's ambitions? To the Pinkertons, and, eventually, the police, when their discreet inquiries were finally abandoned for the public search, the burned fiction would become emblematic of the case itself. Every detail too neat, every clue possible double meaning, every fragment suggestive, but never complete. Francis Arnold, faced with his daughter's fire-blackened manuscripts, said little, but locked the remnants away. He would allow no reporter or unvetted investigator to see them. Fearful, perhaps, of what prurient imaginations might make of so little. In the library, beneath the stern gaze of family portraits, Dorothy's letters, charred and barely legible, offered only more questions. The detective's report, in the clipped voice of neutrality, concluded, Miss Arnold appeared to have recently burned several of her own fictional compositions, some evidently returned by notables including Century magazine. The subject appeared exorcised by the failures, but no suicide note or related writing was found. They added, almost as an afterthought, that Dorothy's most recent stories were melancholy in tone, but not overtly desperate. In that winter gloam, the ashes grew colder with every passing hour. What they concealed, or failed to conceal, could not quiet the ache in the walls of 108 East 79th, nor answer the growing, terrible question whispered late at night. What was the real state of Dorothy's heart as she stepped into the city's indifferent crowd? A clue, or a smokescreen? The truth, like so much of Dorothy's lost prose, refused to surrender to the flames. Instead, it lingered in the air, the scent of paper, sweet and acrid, a note in the ashes that would haunt the investigation for months to come. 6 days. That's how long the Arnolds managed to hold back the city's insatiable hunger, its reporters, gossips, sightseers, and the watching eyes of their social peers. 6 days of polite silence, restricted inquiries, and coded notes exchanged among a select circle of the right people. But, even in the fortress-like homes of elite Manhattan, secrets cannot hold forever. So, when the news finally slipped out, first a rumor, then a certainty, the spiderweb shivered all at once. One of the city's own, a debutante, an heiress, had vanished. The society pages, always in search of the next trimmer of scandal, seized upon the story with merciless glee. "Where is Dorothy Arnold?" barked one headline the morning the story broke. At first, the language was polite, concerned for the well-being of a young woman who, after all, belonged to the tapestry of New York's finest. But it wasn't long before the real questions sprouted like weeds. Had Dorothy Arnold run off in disgrace? Was there a secret assignation? Was her mind unsettled by the pressures of her gilded upbringing? The more the Arnolds shunned the press and declined to comment, the faster rumor outpaced restraint. The city's drawing rooms buzzed with half-truths and speculation. By the seventh day, Dorothy's disappearance had become the single inescapable subject at teas, luncheons, and card tables. The Washburns, the Hammersleys, the Careys, families forever preoccupied by the terrors of social embarrassment, now found themselves whispering about Dorothy as if recounting a ghost story. Theories blossomed with every telling. She must have eloped. There could be no other explanation for such secrecy. My cousin swears she saw Dorothy boarding a train at Grand Central, in tears. Wasn't there talk of a nervous temperament? She was always so intense, poor dear. These speculations crept swiftly into print. Newspapers that catered to high society, town topics, the Evening World, the New York Times, devoted columns to the growing mystery. Beneath ever larger headlines, Dorothy's face, her graduation photograph, her confident gaze, her serious old-world features, became a citywide emblem for the unnerving truth that even the most sheltered might simply vanish. The family's silence only sharpened the city's appetite. The Arnolds, in their determination to avoid another minor scandal, became, unwittingly, the central source of the fever. Reporters were kept at arm's length. Friends instructed to offer no statement to the press. But secrets have a mathematics all their own. The less the Arnolds said, the more the public wanted to invent. Overnight, everyone was in the know. Maids whispered in kitchens that Dorothy had rejected a proper suitor and now faced the consequences. At barber shops and clubs, men wondered aloud about secret loves, debts, or a moment's reckless indiscretion. On the city's newsstands, papers speculated with near gleeful abandon. Heiress elopes, or worse. Society beauty feared deranged. Was Dorothy Arnold a victim of blackmail? It was said Dorothy had been seen on a ferry, her eyes rimmed with tears. No, insisted another, she traveled west with an unknown suitor. Perhaps the mysterious Mr. Griscom, the family's rumored bête noire. An unnamed informant claimed she had been often melancholy over her failed literary ambitions and must surely have suffered a breakdown. Every innuendo, however baseless, found echo in the city's hungry imagination. On the city's east side, some whispered of white slavery and abductions, the terrors real enough to stalk the margins of even the best neighborhoods. On the west side, in smoky newspaper offices, editors demanded more. A photograph, a personal letter, but the Arnold household released none. Asterisk asterisk, the family's lawyers turned away reporters at the door. "We do not discuss family matters," Mr. Arnold lectured, his words frostbitten with rage and shame. Every passing day pried private wounds further open. The city's gaze, usually so indifferent, now seemed to rend apart the very veil of privacy the Arnolds most wanted to protect. Servants found themselves followed on shopping errands, interrogated at the grocer's about Miss Arnold's moods. Dorothy's friends, once grateful for her confidences, now recoiled from the attention. Some even fled the city outright to escape the siege of questions. In the papers, the narrative shifted daily from tragedy to scandal to romance gone awry. Tongues wagged about a secret affair with a married man, a forbidden engagement, debts, and even criminal involvement. A wild flight. A family too proud to call for help, wondered the New York Tribune. Satirical poets published short, lurid verses mocking the family's rigid composure. Oh, where is Miss Arnold? So clever and fair? Out in the wild, or gasping for air? A lover, a breakdown, a runaway shame. Let Arnold forever preserve her good name. Day after day, the actual facts of the case, her departure from Brentano's, the discreet errands of a December afternoon, were buried beneath opinion and vivid speculation. Not even the detectives, now forced to work in the glare of publicity, could stem the tide. Soon, Mrs. Arnold avoided even the most loyal of friends for fear of some innocent remark winding up in print or, worse, in the hands of an enemy. For many in high society, the case soon became less about Dorothy herself and more a parable of their own anxieties, about the dangers facing modern daughters, the fragility of reputation, the costs of ambition, the price of secrecy. Dorothy's fate was imagined in all directions: a romance with a foreigner, abduction by traffickers, a fall from grace and a leap into the Hudson, a secret child, a suicide at sea. Theory replaced truth. Hysteria sharpened, then fractured into resignation. As the new year edged closer, the story refused to fade. A society missing person, day after day, shamed by their own mystery. Whatever the truth, it had become, for all, a cautionary tale. If even the daughter of the Arnolds could vanish, what safety, what certainty could anyone claim? With the city abuzz and the press spinning a dozen scandalous theories to fill the vacuum of facts, speculation soon began to center on the shadowy possibility of a secret love, a man whose presence lingered just outside the formal rooms and polished rituals of the Arnold home. 6 days after Dorothy's disappearance, amid the clatter of evening papers and the hush of drawing rooms, a particular name surfaced, whispered first among society's inner circle, and then blared in headlines eager to match public intrigue with private drama. George S. Griscom, Jr. To outsiders, Griscom was the quintessential bachelor of means, dapper, of privileged birth, his reputation more defined by leisure than by duty, and lacking any known profession. Born to a wealthy Pittsburgh family, he spent his days alternating between extended vacations in the American East and fashionable sojourns abroad. Where others saw aimlessness, Dorothy may have seen freedom, a break from the rigid choreography of her own existence. He was not part of the city's oldest families, but his easy confidence fit him comfortably into sophisticated circles, both in Manhattan and Newport, where men smoked and played at business, and daughters like Dorothy longed to slip the leash of expectation. Much in their friendship was public record. Dorothy met Griscom years before during the family's vacations at summer resorts. They shared an ease of conversation, a taste for theaters, and, according to close friends, a mutual impatience with society's rules. Though never openly announced as a suitor, George Griscom became, in the coded language of such households, a close friend of Miss Arnold. As acquaintances gossiped with nervous precision, dormant letters and recollections began to surface. Had Dorothy ever confided heartbreaking disappointment after arguments at home about him? Had she ever hinted that Griscom was at odds with her father? The lines between memory and invention blurred with every retelling. It was the letters that transformed George Griscom from a name to a specter stalking the search for Dorothy. In the days after her disappearance, the family, pressured ever more by detectives and societal whispers, searched Dorothy's room for notes, diaries, tickets, anything to suggest a concrete plan or destination. In a locked drawer inside her writing desk, behind a discreet compartment, Mary Arnold found an envelope. Inside, a small clutch of heartfelt letters, written in Dorothy's own slanted hand, addressed to Griscom with an intimacy never shared at the dinner table. The language of these letters was unmistakable. Here was longing, admiration, and the ache of disappointment. Dorothy's voice alternately pleaded and resigned itself to the realities of their separation, her complaints about the limitations placed on her, her father's stern warnings, her mother's cool skepticism. Griscom, for his part, replied with equal measure of affection and regret. "I long as you do for the day when these obstacles have fallen away," he wrote in one letter, its warmth undercut only by the ambiguity of his promises. He vacillated between flattery and reticence, between the promise of the future and vague encouragements to be patient. Family tensions were palpable in her words. Dorothy sometimes described her father's forbidding manner regarding Griscom, and on several occasions, her sorrow at not being considered free to choose her own path. With each sentence, the possibility grew, at least in the public's imagination, that Dorothy's disappearance was not the tragedy of a vanished innocent, but the dramatic culmination of forbidden love. Stories soon seized on the fact that Dorothy once traveled secretly to Boston, where, as emerged in later investigation, and to the deep embarrassment of her family, she had spent several days in Griscom's company without the chaperonage of a family member. The event, once suppressed, was now deemed an elopement in all but name by city reporters and social rivals alike, and the Arnold's credibility eroded with every new revelation. Detectives, eager to chase the lead, dispatched telegrams and letters across the Atlantic, for by this December George Griscom was not in New York at all. In the weeks leading up to Dorothy's disappearance, Griscom was residing in Florence, enjoying the indolent hospitality of pension life and corresponding fitfully with friends back in America. Was their plan to meet in Europe, a city of romance, beyond the reach of disapproving fathers and society's relentless gaze? Did Dorothy, defeated by family strife and literary disappointment, seek escape and renewal on another continent? With only George Griscom as her anchor, the Arnolds, grasping for order amid chaos, attempted a direct approach. As clues dead-ended and rumors multiplied, Francis Arnold and his wife took the ignominious step of traveling to Italy themselves. Crossing winter oceans, hearts knotted with dread and the residue of 1,000 whispered scandals. They arrived at Griscom's hotel in Florence unannounced, their polite officiality barely masking the frantic plea beneath their questions. In the Galleria Savoy, they found a pale, anxious George Griscom, who insisted upon his innocence and offered evidence of his presence in Italy at the time of Dorothy's disappearance. He professed to love Dorothy, claimed ignorance of any plan to meet her in Europe that December, and produced telegrams from Dorothy as proof of their recent distance, not collusion. His responses only muddied the waters. If he loved Dorothy, and in their seized correspondence her longing was plain, why did he not do more to advocate for her, to refuse the constraints of their circumstances? Why, when pressed, did he seem both defensive and defeated, unmoored by questions he could not answer? The Arnolds, desperate for clarity, left Italy with only more uncertainty, more speculation to be devoured by every society page in New York. Despite every denial and official statement, the theories could not be put to rest. Was Dorothy following her heart to a man who dithered at the moment of commitment? Had the clash between her family's suffocating expectations and her own yearning become too much to bear? Or, more darkly, did her romantic entanglement make her especially vulnerable to manipulation by others who followed her movements that day? To the relentless, whispering city, only one detail felt as real as the nervous faces of Dorothy's family or the dramatic prose of her letters. In the final days of her known life, Dorothy Arnold's heart ached for what was forbidden, and that ache, caught like a thread between Manhattan and Florence, would never be traced to its origin or end. With Griscom's shadow cast across the disappearance and all attempts at explanation only spawning more questions, every new day brought another ripple of rumor and a deeper shade of uncertainty to a family's heartbreak. And still, Dorothy remained gone. Florence, Italy, late December 1910. The city is shrouded in the shadowed cool of late winter, its narrow Renaissance streets winding beneath gray skies, domes and bell towers pressing close overhead. Under these foreign rooftops, Dorothy Arnold's parents have traveled thousands of miles in exhaustion, humiliation, and hope, following a slender thread of rumor, desperation their only guide. In the privacy of their stateroom, aboard the Atlantic steamer, they have rehearsed, time and again, the questions they will ask and the answers they fear and need to hear. When the Arnolds arrive at the Pensione Savoy, where George S. Griscom, Jr. has been residing for weeks, their faces are masks of stoic American reserve. They are met not with the sly affability the press will one day attribute to Griscom, but with a man visibly aged by anxiety, his eyes rimmed with fatigue, voice trembling between courteous formality and genuine sorrow. Word had reached Griscom days before. Dorothy, his friend, maybe more, was missing. Newspapers, even here, carried the story, and in the clattering world of hotel tongues, nothing travels faster than Manhattan scandal. Mrs. Mary Arnold wears her best black. Her husband is brisk, his handshake abrupt, gray brows furrowed over eyes that will not rest until this matter is closed. Once seated, Griscom's hands twist a handkerchief, betraying the tension behind his measured speech. The Arnolds begin, gently at first, then with increasing urgency. Not so much interrogators as parents pleading across the gulf of social difference and youthful entanglement. Mr. Griscom, we are simply here for the truth. It is imperative you answer us plainly. Are you in correspondence with our daughter now? Have you seen or heard from Dorothy since December 12th? Griscom shakes his head, his voice low, brittle. No, sir. I have not. I swear to you. It is as much a shock to me as I'm sure it is to you. Dorothy and I exchanged telegrams. She told me of her unhappiness, the recent silences, her difficult relations at home, but I have not seen her, not since. He falters, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Pressed for detail, Griscom produces a packet of telegrams and letters, yellowed by travel, handled so many times the creases have become part of their fabric. Dorothy's voice emerges from these pages, not the heedless scribble of a debutante, but the intricate, sometimes desperate candor of a young woman seeking solace and understanding well beyond the polite world her family occupies. My family do not understand me, Dorothy writes in one telegram, the lines sharp and hurried as if sent during a moment of confrontation. The script aches with longing, with the tension between duty and desire. In another, she expresses disappointment, not only in her failed writing ambitions, so scorned in her father's eyes, but in her sense of exclusion. I feel I move through marble halls, admired but unheard. Even you, sometimes, seem just out of reach. Griscom's replies, produced, shaken, his own signature compressed by the limits of the telegram form, are conciliatory but vague. He urges patience, hopes for reunion, makes promises he cannot keep. In person, Griscom is more broken than calculating. Whatever hopes he had were dashed as soon as Dorothy vanished. As the Arnolds read, their daughter's loneliness becomes a script. You do not know what it is like to be known by everyone, but prized by no one for who you are, Dorothy writes, a trace of literary flourish shaping the sentiment. Across a cold hotel sitting room in Florence, Francis Arnold's anger flashes, not only at Griscom himself, but at the whole arrangement, the secret correspondence, the private hopes the two young people shared, the fact that this man, so obviously adrift in his own privileges, should be the unlikely confidant of his cherished, complicated daughter. He bristles at Griscom's claim that he did nothing, that he could do nothing more than what he had. Right, console, hope. Mary Arnold, alternately icy and pleading, asks, George, please, did Dorothy ever speak of running away? Did she ever mention Europe, or suicide, but Griscom cuts her off, mortified. No, Mrs. Arnold. I believe she dreamed of being free, of being happy, but not of anything so final, I assure you. We imagined, perhaps foolishly, a time when we could be together in daylight, in respectability. But she never spoke of disappearing. Never. He hands them the last telegram Dorothy sent, dated late November. I am heartsick. They will not allow me peace. Write soon. I am lonely. There is no hint of conspiracy in these final lines. Only weariness and hope and the bruised confession of someone cornered by circumstance. Over the course of hours that day and the next, the Arnolds examine every plausible angle. Griscom's hotel receipts, confirmed by the pension's manager, place him firmly in Florence at the time of Dorothy's disappearance in New York. Telegram records show regular exchanges, but no coded language, no signs of secret arrangements. Nevertheless, the press will not be satisfied by these facts, and neither will Dorothy's grieving parents, for absence always creates room for menace, for fantasy. Devastated, Griscom assures them he will do what he can from afar. Place notices, fund inquiries, implore his own family's contacts to search for Dorothy. He offers, in a moment of exhausted candor, to return to New York, but Francis Arnold refuses. "You will not. Your presence there will only encourage gossip. We will handle this at home." His voice, iron and wounded, leaves no room for argument. In the weeks after, letters and cables travel back and forth between New York and Florence, each new exchange bringing more questions than answers. Society columns and news reports seize on irrelevant details. The color of Griscom's tie, the dinner guests at his pensione, sightings conjured by rumor and desperation. After the Arnold's departure, Griscom spends his days pacing Florence's fog-laced streets, haunted by the very specter he helped, unwittingly or not, to create. The vanished American girl, luminous and troubled, lost now to both families and continents. As the weeks turn into months and spring brings new leaves to the Arno, the telegrams, those confessions of heartbreak, those scenes of secrecy strung out across the Atlantic, become the only tangible link to a young woman whose fate rouses a city's dread and a family's grief. They are artifacts of longing and misunderstanding, moth-eaten with regret. The world that would not listen in life now listens too closely to the echoes Dorothy left behind, and no cable, confession, or overseas journey can silence or clarify her final wordless goodbye. As the New Year's wind rattles the window panes of the Arnold house, outside, the world is thrumming with an energy almost feverish, part hope, part chaos, and, now, something more, obsession. No longer the sole concern of the family and their discreet Pinkerton men, the disappearance of Dorothy Arnold has become a magnet for the city's insatiable imagination. The press, scenting scandal, have sunk roots along Fifth Avenue, staked themselves outside the Arnold residence, and begun to prowl through Manhattan's heart like wolf packs and fedoras. Each headline births a new flurry of activity. Newsboys hawk fresh editions with Dorothy's graduation portrait, her solemn, shaded eyes haunting every corner from sidewalk newsstands to barber shops. "Society beauty still missing," shouts the world. Was she last seen weeping in Central Park? Each claim, built only of the city's rumor, fills the silence left by fact. Store clerks, cabmen, newsboys, everyone who brushed the broad boulevards that day suddenly claims a piece of her. In the crowd at Brentano's bookstore, a matron is convinced Dorothy exchanged a worried word with a stranger. A hotel page swears he glimpsed her coat as she slipped up a side street. A milliner along Park Avenue announces that a pale, anxious girl who looked just like Miss Arnold inquired after a train schedule, though her memory flickers under press questioning. The city's working class, hungry for drama beyond the daily grind, lean into the mystery. Newspaper offices are deluged with letters and phone calls. Each one offers a different sighting, always tantalizingly close, never verifiable. "I saw her on the 59th Street Bridge, sir, in a blue hat, staring off at the water. She was in tears, sitting alone on a bench in Central Park, just as dusk began to fall. I remember her gloves." A young lady, sad but polite, bought a one-way ferry ticket at the Battery. Asked the man at the gate for the slowest crossing. Isn't that curious? Another swears she appeared at a small hotel in Jersey City, demanding a room, but then, poof, gone before registration. The stories contradict, overlap, multiply. Some fuel each other, growing more vivid with each telling. Stout cab drivers are sure she entered their brougham and gave an address near the docks, but when pressed for detail, memory blurs. A lady is a lady, but I recall her eyes, dark and lost. Newsboys repeat whispers of a woman matching Dorothy's description wandering in the snow near the Hudson, staggering, disturbed, in search of someone or something nobody can name. The blurred line between witness and participant, between fact and urban legend, expands with every retelling. Detectives, both public and private, chase ghosts through coffee shops, train depots, empty boarding houses. At the Central Park Reservoir, a constable searches bushes where a persistent letter writer claims to have seen a Miss Arnold, unconscious, tended by a man in gray. Nothing is found but stray scarves, lost mittens, newspaper wrappers. With each passing day, the ground seems to shift beneath the searchers' feet. The press, having turned the city into a living map of Dorothy's last movements, now editorialize aloud on motives. Was she kidnapped? Driven mad by private grief? Living under another name with a lover in Philadelphia? Or felled by amnesia in an anonymous hospital bed? Every new sighting is a lead and a labyrinth. A search party to the riverbank, a cab ride out to Harlem, a request to solitary dock workers, and elevator boys. All return empty-handed. In her absence, Dorothy's image becomes something larger than life, an idea instead of a person. Artists render her in ink for Sunday extras, her likeness slightly altered with every print. Eyes a little wider, mouth a little more troubled. She is elegant victim and reckless adventurer, a cipher of the city's fears and cravings, a Fifth Avenue phantom. The Arnold family, doing their best to maintain composure under siege, are beset by strangers at every turn. She's been taken. She's joined the chorus. She has gone west and changed her name. Francis Arnold, exhausted and humiliated, fends off journalists at his gates. You people are responsible for half these lies. Yet, for all the city's noise, there is no pattern, only the shuddering of rumor, ceaseless and unstoppable. Fifth Avenue, once a parade of millionaires and matrons, is now haunted by possibility. People cross its wide, wind-blown expanses watching for a familiar face. For weeks, every slender brunette with downcast eyes finds herself stared at, questioned, even followed. The city itself becomes a vast stage for her vanishing. Truth slips further from reach, eclipsed by the carnival of conjecture. In drawing rooms, they whispered Dorothy's name as if she were both a caution and a curse. In the tenements, mothers warned daughters to walk in pairs and never trust strange men. In the bars and boarding houses, stories mutate. Miss Arnold stole away for love. Miss Arnold was taken. Miss Arnold died. And her ghost walks the midnight boulevards, forever lost in the city that made her. The longer she remains missing, the more Dorothy becomes not a girl, but a riddle, a story shared between breaths, always just out of sight. Fifth Avenue, bright with gaslight and snow, is no longer grand or safe. It is haunted, a place of ghosts. January's unyielding hand closed around New York City, locking the avenues and parks under a sheath of iron cold. Each evening, darkness arrived earlier, gnawing at the resolve of the searchers who had, by now, combed every rational avenue of hope. The world above the streets, snug parlors, gaslit shops, well-tended facades, could not keep out the rumor or the dread settling like fog in the marrow of the Arnold household. As the new year broke, Dorothy's absence was no longer simply a mystery. It became a presence in itself, a shadow stretching long between every pair of worried eyes. In the city's heart, Central Park lay bare and hushed under a thin crust of snow, its frozen reservoirs reflecting the pale January sun. The landscape was austere. Jagged tree limbs, glossy brittle, framed the icy stretches. The stone bridges, once crowded with strolling couples, now echoed only with the wind's sarcastic whistle. It was here, beneath this silent, indifferent expanse, that the search for Dorothy Arnold turned desperate and grim. With public attention mounting and private efforts exhausted, the family's dread at last yielded to the inevitability of involving the city's police. Uniformed officers and detectives, reluctantly called in, their presence a final admission that silence and secrecy had failed, began the process that no family of means or reputation ever wishes to see. A public, visible search, open to the scrutiny and imagination of 1,000 strangers. In the age of ink-splashed headlines, there was no other way. The police began with the lines of her last known route, and then widened the circle, logic straining to keep pace with rumor. The most chilling whispers pointed north and west, toward the great silent eye of the Central Park Reservoir. There, the city searchers gathered on a morning so cold that even breath seemed to freeze in the air. Polished shoes and thick boots broke the crust as pairs of men, lanterns in hand, circled the massive granite rim and scanned the dark, unmoving water. At various points, grappling hooks were flung into the blackness, the rope lines creaking as they sliced beneath the surface. The ice groaned, as if the very city itself resented the disturbance. They dragged the reservoir, methodically, grimly. Onlookers pressed along the iron rail above, their faces pale and eager as the laborers' hands pulled up only the refuse of months gone by. Broken branches, the odd lost scarf, a battered umbrella or two. But not Dorothy, not a shoe, not a scrap of blue velvet, not the flush of a drowned face breaking glassy water. Each unsuccessful attempt brought a muted relief and a nagging question. If not here, then where? The search bled outward. At the icy banks of the Hudson, dock workers, bribed and haunted, shuffled through driftwood and garbage as river ice snapped beneath their boots. Ferries were stopped in mid-crossing. Ticket masters questioned yet again for any recollection of a young woman, nervous or alone, in a fine fur coat. The same story recurred. No, none like that, though plenty come to the river these days. Whispers spun through the docklands, catching in the city's cold arteries, that the water's edge was a place where the lost might slip away, their stories consumed beneath the tides. But the men who searched found nothing but bolted lines and the stony faces of police freezing under morning frost. From the Arnold home, Francis Arnold braced himself against each new wave of official business. The practicalities of the search, signatures, permissions, the indignity of oversight, chafed against his pride, but the deeper wound was the message sown through every action. His daughter might, after all, be simply gone. He clung, again and again, to a visible sign, her coat. If she had drowned in the reservoir, he insisted to the police, to gathered reporters, to anyone who would listen. Her fur coat would have floated. Nothing could sink all that weight, all that richness, unless, of course, she did not wish to be found. Yet hope grew brittle in the mouth. Each day Dorothy failed to reappear, each fruitless sweep under the bridge or along the snowy banks deepened the ache beneath the confident words. Her perfume still haunted the upstairs chambers. Her letters, tidied and locked away for inspection, seemed to accuse with every unopened page. And each night, the city pressed closer, as rumors crawled under every threshold. Throughout the search, dread was a living thing, cohabiting with the family, infecting the maids and relatives, brushing the skirts of every friend who dared knock on the Arnold's door. It was in the way hands shook slightly pouring tea or turning up the lamps, in the way footsteps were hushed even at midday, as if to avoid waking whatever nightmare might lurk in the dark. The cold, the darkness, the police, the dragging hooks. None could lift the burden that now defined the Arnold household or the city's imagination. The empty reservoir, pristine and undisturbed, became a taunting mirror. It held the promise of a secret, but yielded nothing. The fur coat, a totem of Dorothy's class and era, never surfaced. Its imagined buoyancy a final bulwark against the certainty the searchers dreaded, that the city had devoured her, whole and silent, leaving not so much as a ripple in the ice. In every house where daughters waited late for their own return, parents tightened their vigilance. And in every society parlor gossip bloomed, dark and sweet, as people wondered how the best could lose one of their own to the night. Dorothy Arnold's absence became a cold season, a presence more vivid for being invisible, her fate as frozen and unreachable as the black water beneath the snow. The search would pause, contract, then balloon again. But always the result was the same. No body, no clue, nothing left but the scent of dread that winter, like the city itself, would not let go. The cold of January lingered well into February. Within the Arnold home, days blurred into shadowy repetition, the city's rhythm lost beneath the hollow beat of unending dread. But beyond the sheltered hush of East 79th Street, Dorothy's absence had taken on a life of its own, a mystery not of one family, but of a wider world hungry for resolution, for the sudden crack of revelation that might end the haunting. As weeks grew long and fruitless, new stories began to drift in with the morning post and the midnight knock. Some were whispers, some confessions, many cruel inventions. All fed the growing legend. Dorothy Arnold was out there, somewhere, lost, hiding, or remade. It began innocuously. An unsigned note, its message trembling on cheap notepaper, arrived from a postal station in Philadelphia. Saw a lady matching your daughter's description in the station cafe. She seemed troubled. Took the 410 to Boston with a man. God willing, she is safe. No name, no details. Detectives, already stretched between truth and fantasy, rushed to trace the alleged sighting, but found nothing. No tickets, no luggage, no remembered face. Next, another letter, this one postmarked from Boston, landed at the door of the family lawyer. To the family of Miss Arnold. I deliver packages along Tremont Street. Saw her walk past only this morning. She looked thinner, different, but smiled. Sorry if this gives false hope, but thought you ought to know. Even as the police dismissed most of these leads, they took each with the solemn gravity of those who had failed at certainty. In New York, detectives scrutinized train registers and hotel records. In Boston, Pinkertons walked the streets, showing Dorothy's photograph to shopgirls and station managers. Again, nothing. Each report, each hope, dissolved into a kind of painful repetition. The city swallowed Dorothy and offered, in return, only mirages. But these Eastern rumors were nothing compared to the letter that arrived in March, stamped in crooked blue ink from far out west, San Francisco, California. It unsettled the household to its bones by presenting, however falsely, a voice the family had not heard in months. The handwriting was unsteady, the grammar oddly formal. I am safe. Please do not worry. Will communicate when I am able. D.A. Word spread to the newspapers within a day, splashed beneath headlines ever hungry for new fuel. Some columnists called the note a hoax, pointing out that Dorothy never signed correspondence with her initials. Others speculated feverishly about elopement, madness, or criminal conspiracy. The San Francisco Examiner stoked the flames. Dorothy Arnold found? Family receives Western note from the abyss. Accompanying was a grainy, speculative illustration of a young woman in traveling cloak, stepping onto a ferry bound for nowhere. The family's lawyer, after conferring with police and handwriting analysts, declared the letter a cruel and monstrous piece of mischief. There were no marks, private jokes, or flourishes Dorothy used. Friends studying her past letters concurred. The writing was stilted, the voice all wrong. And yet, for a night, maybe two, the flicker of reckless hope unsettled even the most rational members of the family. What if Dorothy, feeling doomed and hounded, had taken flight in a far-off city, seeking the anonymity and freedom she could never grasp on 79th Street? After this, the floodgates had opened. Postcards and anonymous scraps landed at police departments in Philadelphia, Buffalo, Rochester, Chicago. Some even came from ports in Canada and the wilds of Montana. Each bore its own dizzying optimism or wounding cruelty. Saw your daughter dining in a parlor by the bay. A lost lady in blue sells hatpins in Cleveland, answers to Dorothy. A teacher in a Coney Island school claims to have housed a weeping girl from New York, but she ran in the night. Check the asylum records. Each report was investigated and dismissed. The trail became a mosaic of ghosts, the collective wishful thinking, malice, and superstition of strangers with too much time, too little sense, or a taste for notoriety. The growing stack of false hope weighed on the Arnolds. Frances Arnold in particular seethed at every bogus clue and curious letter. If Dorothy were alive, would she not send some honest word home? Do you think my daughter, educated and dutiful, would leave us for the amusement of the city rags? The cruelty of not knowing became its own punishment, a daily ritual that severed the ordinary business of life. Mary Arnold aged visibly before the eyes of her friends. Reporters lingered on the stoop. Family friends visited less, catching the illness of uncertainty. Rumors fed upon themselves, thickening as each story ricocheted across a sleepless nation. Some insisted Dorothy had changed her appearance, cropped her hair, and was living incognito in San Francisco's swirl of new arrivals, the city of do-overs, one reporter called it. Others pointed to Philadelphia's Quaker neighborhoods, a favorite rest stop for runaways of good breeding. More letters came, each more obviously contrived, spidery handwriting, florid language, postmarks from Texas, Colorado, New Orleans. Their wild claims and false confessions soon became indistinguishable from cruel jokes. The police came to dread every new report as much as the Arnolds did. Detectives, weary from months of misdirection, learned to scan for the obvious tells. Inconsistent phrasing, misspelled names, dates that couldn't be possible. Still, they were compelled to chase each ghost, if only to silence the insatiable public and their own sense of duty. The city was now not merely searching for a woman, but for something lost within itself, a certainty, a graceful ending that would never come. In time, this endless tide of correspondence fostered a peculiar fatigue. Each new note delivered heartbreak, hope, and finally, numbness, a cycle of faith and doubt that would outlast even the most persistent rumor. Dorothy Arnold had become an American myth, a floating question, her memory drifting not just through rivers and rail stations, but through the ragged edges of a nation's conscience. In this avalanche of false notes, only one truth remained. Dorothy's real voice, wherever it had gone, would never reach her family again. All that was left were these postcards from the abyss, chilling, disembodied echoes of a young woman who had, for a moment, seemed to belong to everyone, but, in the end, belonged to no one at all. Time crawled in grief's slow circles around the Arnold home, refusing to bring either relief or revelation. In the anxious weeks after Dorothy's disappearance, the household had lived in a state of constant motion. Detectives crossing the threshold with every dawn, telegrams stacked at the hall table, family and staff moving through the routines of hope and vigilance. But as winter yielded to spring and spring unfolded into a second silent season, the nature of waiting changed. It turned inward, helpless, static, silent as a sealed room. There were still no ransom notes, no threats, no demands for gold or anonymity in exchange for a daughter's return. For all the fevered theories scattered by the press, abduction, elopement, madness, death, there was never a single word from those unseen hands which might have spirited Dorothy away. The world hoped for clarity, if not a body to mourn, then at least a letter, a confession, a request for mercy or money. But none came, not in all the months and years that would follow. Dorothy's writing desk was the first shrine to her absence. It stood against the pale wall in her upstairs room, untouched for months, then years. Its neat regiment of pens and inkwells slowly surrendered to dust. Her last stack of rejection slips faded in sunlight, the edges curling on themselves like petals around a well of sorrow. Unfinished manuscript pages, neatly stacked in her brisk, enthusiastic hand, remained exactly where she'd left them that chill December morning, now brittle with time and longing. Her mother could never bring herself to clear away the folders and ink bottles. They became tokens of cautious, unspoken hope, as if to tidy Dorothy's desk was to admit, finally, that she would never again hunch over its surface, chewing her pen and blinking into the lamp's amber glow. For the family, especially her mother, the room demanded stillness. Each morning, a maid silently drew the curtains, dusted the spines of Byron, Twain, and the other books she loved, and carefully avoided touching the desk. Sometimes, in the twilight, Mrs. Arnold would sit on the neatly made bed and stare at the writing corner, hands folded, eyes vacant and shining with unshed tears. As the months wound on, the world lost interest and then, inevitably, forgot. The space Dorothy left behind remained, but the urgent noise faded. The swarm of press receded, the Pinkertons disengaged, family friends, and even society's gossips moved on to fresher tragedies and scandals. The unanswered questions, the ones that had once seemed so urgent, were now muted, dulled by time's weight and the thousand cruelties of not knowing. But from time to time, A ripple would disturb the still surface of this new, hard quiet. A glimmer suggesting that Dorothy might yet have a piece on the world's grand chessboard. Reports surfaced, then vanished. A woman matching her description cited in Newark, another purchasing a train ticket under a false name in Albany, another living in anonymity in the wilds of upstate New York. For a day or a week, these rumors would stir old emotions, hope, disbelief, humiliation, grief. But each hope proved illusory. Each story dissolved under scrutiny, leaving nothing but the ache behind. The city itself, busy with 1,000 dramas, had largely let go. Only a few shops and haunts that Dorothy favored marked her absence with a strain of memory and unease. Brentano's bookstore, whose polished shelves and gentleman clerks had last welcomed her with the day's purchase, became such a place, a retail sanctum and a private shrine. And so it was said that almost 2 years after Dorothy's disappearance, late on a colorless autumn afternoon, a young woman entered Brentano's. The staff, those with long memories and a habit of observation, recalled the visitor as striking but subdued, dark-haired beneath her hat, fine-boned, her bearing nervous and furtive. She waited politely as the clerk finished with another patron, then approached with deliberate calm. "Excuse me," she murmured. "I believe a book may have arrived for Miss Dorothy Arnold." The clerk, startled by the name and the context it awakened, observed quietly, trying not to stare. He stammered a reply, that no such order remained, and glanced, as if instinctively, to the record book where Dorothy's last, uncollected order had been crossed out years before. The young woman waited, perhaps hoping for a different reply, or perhaps only acting out some private, enigmatic ritual. She nodded stiffly, thanked him with a sadness that did not touch her mouth, and left as quickly and quietly as she had appeared. By the time the clerk found his voice and rushed to see if she could be followed, she was already gone, folded into the city's drifting crowd. The incident, told in low voices among the shop's employees and soon after to the Arnold family, did little to restore hope and only deepened the air of uncertainty. Was it Dorothy herself, a prodigal daughter gone to ground, searching out a last, ghostly connection to a former life? Was it merely a prankster, drunk on the myth that Dorothy's legend had become? Or had some fearful friend, forever haunted by guilt or knowledge, performed a task on her behalf, leaving the world with yet another unanswerable question? No one dared say. It was one of dozens of such sightings. Yet, being at Brentano's, it struck deeper than most. There, alongside Dorothy's final purchase, her vanished presence became almost tangible. Booksellers gossiped in careful conspiracies. Newspaper men filed away the story, never sure whether to print it or to let it, like the memory of Dorothy herself, dissolve into silence. The police, having exhausted every line, simply noted the incident in their logbooks and pressed on. As years became a decade, the world moved on. New tragedies took center stage. New faces replaced the lost in the city's daily churn, but some things remained, enduring, unsolved, and eloquently unfinished. Dorothy's room, dust-layered and undisturbed, remained the aching center of a vanished life. Her desk, untouched, became a mausoleum to hope and potential. The pages she'd left behind grew fragile and yellow in the quiet, sunlight-drenched afternoons, her ink fading to sepia, her writing now laden with prophecy and finality. In that silence, Dorothy Arnold lingered, in memory at least, as a typist without a conclusion, a story without a final page. The years offered no ransom, no demand, no answer, only shadows and the deepening hush of absence, the long echo of the writer's silence. As the years wore on and the city's fascination with Dorothy Arnold's fate faded into the back pages, the story never quite released its hold on the anxious corners of the American psyche. Her family, tethered to hope only by the ache of not knowing, retreated deeper into guarded silence. But the empty spaces left by fact proved irresistible to the restless imaginations of strangers. And so, in the slow, echoing passage of time, The Dorothy Arnold mystery became a magnet for another kind of revelation, a stream, part confession and part rumor, that trickled into police hands, fanned by fear, conscience, and the persistent human longing for closure. It began, as such things often do, with a letter, and signed, its careful script betraying an old-fashioned education. The message was short, barely coherent, as if written in a fever. Its claims were astonishing. Dorothy Arnold, it insisted, had died in surgical agony, her body spirited away to avoid scandal. The note spoke of a doctor, a name almost, but not quite, familiar to the detectives who, so many years on, had catalogued every wild claim. The writer offered no evidence, no dates, only anxiety and an address that led nowhere. Weeks after this letter, a detective working a different case in the Lower East Side heard a story almost identical, murmured at the bedside of a dying patient. This time, a physician's name was attached. The man was a graying, once prominent surgeon who had, it was said, helped society girls in trouble. The story, threadbare and tinged with remorse, described how Dorothy, desperate and frightened, had arrived at his West 59th Street office in the bleak days after her disappearance. She had come alone, at night, under assumed name and by special arrangement. It was said she had sought, and paid dearly for, an illegal operation, one that would shield both her family and suitor from ruin. According to the tale, something went horribly, fatally wrong. There were whispers of fever, unstoppable hemorrhage, frantic midnight telegrams. When Dorothy died on the table, the doctor panicked. With the aid of a nurse, he arranged for her body to be removed by night, ferried away through service doors and down city alleys to a pauper's grave, or perhaps farther afield, to be destroyed beyond recognition. When the doctor himself later fell ill, broken by guilt, he is said to have confided the story to a friend or nurse, begging for forgiveness in the face of death. Years later, a second, almost parallel confession made headlines in a small New Jersey town and found its way, inevitably, to the New York press. This account, offered by an aged nurse, named no doctors but spoke in mournful code. She described secret hospitals that catered to wayward daughters of society, places steeped in discretion, where family names were never spoken and ledgers burned at week's end. Here, she claimed, young women, frantic, ashamed, fearful of mothers and fathers, would come seeking help in the form of risky, illegal abortions. The consequences, she said, could be fatal. There was always someone who never left the hospital alive, the nurse whispered. They took such care with the records, those old families. Sometimes, if a girl died, she simply vanished. These layered admissions were at once horrifying and unprovable. Over time, dozens of such deathbed confessions and anonymous letters would surface, each retelling the same essential tragedy in different voices, with slightly altered details. Sometimes the doctor was Italian, sometimes Irish. The location might be a brownstone, an East Side boarding house, or a clandestine ward in the Bronx. Some details hinted at a cover-up so thorough that even the undertaker would have no idea whose body he buried. The Arnold family, already hollowed by grief and humiliation, met each new revelation with a stony silence, a silence deeper and more final than any denial or protest. Francis Arnold, when pressed by reporters about these tales, simply bristled, his voice clipped and cold. My daughter was never in need of that kind of help. These stories are the inventions of people who never knew her or wished to profit by our suffering. To Dorothy's mother, these rumors were daggers. She turned inwards, stopped receiving visitors, and kept to the third floor except for meals. No official inquiry ever produced a body. No city coroner reported the appearance of a young woman matching Dorothy's description among the nameless dead. The city's morgues and potter's fields, when searched, offered only the anonymous sorrow of countless unclaimed women. For the city's newspapers, these revelations were irresistible, strains of truth and urban legend, sewn together into editorials, opinion pieces, and reinvestigations. Readers were led through a sad parade of vanished girls and frightened parents, a dark underbelly to the city's parade of lights and carriages. To the police and Pinkerton men who had worked the case, the confessions changed little, lacking dates, addresses, or even the original claimants' true names. There was nothing to investigate, no closure to be offered, no crime to be proved or solved, only a gnawing sense of inevitability. As years slipped by, these stories gained the patina of legend. Journalists, running their Mysteries of Old New York columns, invoked Dorothy's name alongside other lost souls, a cipher not just for vanished daughters, but for the secrets the city kept, the dangers its wealthier citizens could not entirely fence out, the punishments reserved for women who strayed, the silence and conspiracy that protected status at all costs. The hollow revelations changed everything and nothing. They reframed Dorothy's disappearance not as a capricious vanishing, but as the cost of being unseen, trapped in a world whose respectability offered no refuge from desperation. Yet, without a body, without proof, without so much as a final, credible account of what truly became of her, Dorothy's case remained, always, a mystery papered over with the confessions of others. Her fate flickered on the city's periphery, a story told and retold, death by rumor and by omission, by the very silence her family thought might one day protect her. By the time a second grim winter settled over New York, the Arnold family was no longer a single, silent front against misfortune. The bright confidence that had once unified their household, the certainty that wealth, social standing, and good breeding could shield them from the world's randomness, had splintered into something sharp, cold, and jagged. Dorothy's disappearance wasn't just a loss. It was a wedge driven deep into the heart of the family, dividing parent from parent, parent from child, home from the city that surrounded and scrutinized them. The first blow was guilt. It pressed hardest on Mary Arnold, Dorothy's mother, whose silence and formality, the light touch of a hand on a teacup, the perfect precision with which she smoothed her daughter's bedsheets, had always concealed a fierce and private devotion. Night after night, she replayed those final mornings. Her daughter's careful smile, the cascade of small reassurances, the measured goodbye that, in retrospect, felt fateful. The what-ifs multiplied, insatiable. What if I had pressed her to stay for tea? What if I had insisted on an escort through the city crowds? What lay behind the sadness in Dorothy's eyes when she thought no one was watching? As weeks became months and rumor piled onto rumor, from whispered suicides to feverish stories of white slavery, to the unending stream of false letters and misdirections, shame arrived. It moved through the household like a fog, thick and invisible, turning every necessary errand into a gauntlet. Not for the Arnolds, the open confessions of the working class. Their suffering was a thing to be hidden, not paraded. Mary stopped going out by day, and then by week, retreating into the darkened parlors and upstairs bedrooms. She withdrew from society entirely, breaking the links of tea and charity that held women like her in place. Invitations piled unopened on the foyer table. Friends, unsure what to say, called less and less. Francis Arnold, called William or Mr. Arnold by acquaintances, suffered differently. He was a man whose world ran along straight lines, business acumen, social order, a patriarch's tidy chain of control. Dorothy's vanishing had not just undone his peace, it had shattered his identity. No matter what role was required, father, provider, defender of reputation, he found himself failing, unable to produce the one result that mattered, the return of his eldest daughter. In this void, obsession took root. Convinced that someone, somewhere, was withholding the truth, Arnold threw his fortune into the search with a single-mindedness that alarmed those closest to him. He placed a standing reward, $1,000 for any information leading to the return of Dorothy, a sum so large it made the front page. For answers to her fate, he promised even more. He retained a shifting roster of private detectives and attorneys, refusing to let police shut down the search, and pressed servants, friends, and distant relations for accounts of Dorothy's state of mind. Everyone was a suspect. Francis scrutinized the household staff, subjecting the maids and footmen to repeated bouts of questioning. Had they seen Dorothy conceal a letter? Had anyone noticed a strange visitor, a hasty note, a phone call in the night? No one escaped his gaze, yet all he found was confusion and, behind it, the ache of impotence. He came to distrust those closest to him, sure that somewhere a critical detail was being withheld, whether through embarrassment or fear of scandal. Even his surviving children, John and Marjorie, watched their father's temper grow short, his manner suspicious. The family's old routines deteriorated into a ritual of listening for footsteps, any ghostly return up the stairs. It wasn't just people he distrusted, it was memory itself. Francis pored over fragments of Dorothy's life. Her school essays, her manuscript drafts, her burning of those stories no magazine would print. He interrogated her friends when he could. Each note she left behind was recast as a clue or a covert confession, each absence a possible conspiracy. Grief and frustration fed on each other in the stifling loneliness of the Arnold townhouse. The dining room, once lively with siblings' banter and parental directives, took on a hush as dense as velvet. Every meal shadowed by an empty place, every conversation truncated at the slightest mention of the missing name. John, the eldest son, took to staying out late, seeking distraction at his club, returning even quieter than before. Marjorie, youngest and least equipped for the burdens of tragedy, watched as the home transformed from sanctuary to suffocating crypt. The household staff, too, was changed. Some requested transfers or found polite reasons to leave. Others, loyal by habit, grew nervous at every new visitor or police query. The sight of Francis Arnold anxiously pacing the marble foyer late at night, his face pale, hair now almost white, became routine, his restlessness a symptom of a deeper, intractable wound. Society, which had once admired the Arnold's poise, became, in its silence, another tormentor. The gossips who had so enjoyed the spectacle of Dorothy's illness and forbidden romance now whispered about her absence, and, by extension, the family's failure. A daughter lost is a fortune's penalty, someone muttered at a dinner in Gramercy Park. The Arnolds are not what they once were. Even the most sympathetic friends withdrew, not out of cruelty but discomfort. A mystery like this, unmarked by bodies or solved by rumors, nestled too uneasily against their own fragile privileges. It was shame and pride that finally sealed the house against the world. Francis grew reclusive, haunted not just by Dorothy's loss, but by his own helplessness, blaming himself for not understanding her, for not trusting her dreams, for choosing secrecy and status over comfort and candor. Mary, shrinking in her own shadow, became a figure flitting through windows and faded corridors, a motherless mother, forever waiting. The reward posters faded on the city's bulletin boards. The detectives' reports grew less frequent and more apologetic. The final, most bitter consequence of Dorothy's disappearance was not public scandal, but the private erosion of connection. A family devoured from within by suspicion, sorrow, and the relentless gnawing of hope turned to despair. The great brownstone on East 79th Street, which once reverberated with the laughter and ambitions of a tightly woven family, became, in the end, a silent tomb. Dorothy's room remained untouched, her perfume lingering faintly in the air atop the dust. Her desk, neither cleared nor added to since the night she vanished, stood as mute witness to every argument, every apology never made, every reason never spoken. The city pressed on, careless and ever-renewing, but in the remains of the Arnold family, all the old certainties had hollowed away. What was left was a wound that would never close, a fracture that, generation by generation, would pass into the bones and memory of New York itself. Years curled away in New York, fresh coats of paint on brownstone, seasons blurring, and the metropolis, always hungry, swallowing its own past. Yet the ghost of Dorothy Arnold refused to fade. Her story, more than a decade old now, had become a spectral fixture in the city's collective gaze. Not merely an unsolved case, but a symbol, a warning, and, for many, a kind of urban legend, proof that even the privileged might fall through the cracks and vanish into the snarl of pavement and rumor. Dorothy's portrait lingered longest in those spaces where hope and resignation entwined. Her face, captured in the composite stare of her Bryn Mawr photograph, serious eyes, dark hair, steady jaw, remained fixed for years on post office corkboards and precinct walls, the missing placard growing yellow and brittle around the edges as other faces came and went. For a time her image lived on streetcar kiosks, beside lost dog notices and advertisements for corsets and patent medicines. The vanished heiress, a fixture as persistent as the city itself. For the people of New York, the name Dorothy Arnold became a byword for caution and the city's indifferent appetite. Schoolgirls whispered on the steps of brownstone stoops, "Don't let what happened to Dorothy happen to you." Mothers repeated the lesson in softer words, "Stay with companions. Don't stray past dusk. Remember your place." Safety, they intoned, was not simply a privilege but a performance, a discipline that even money could not guarantee. Yet for all the solemnity grafted onto her fate, the story belonged as much to the city's darker amusements as to its quiet anxieties. Dime novelists seized upon Dorothy's fate, inventing wild scenarios of abduction, marriage, world travel, madness, and crime. Publishers hawked penny dreadfuls with lurid woodcuts on the cover. The heiress who vanished. Lost in the night. The real Dorothy Arnold. Authors rewrote her story dozens of different ways, sometimes as victim, sometimes as runaway adventurer, sometimes spectral and knowing, haunting the very corners of a city that seemed to devour women. Stage plays staged maudlin melodramas, inspired by true events. Songwriters composed ballads about her, sung on makeshift stages or in the backrooms of cheap bars, their lyrics a warning, a lament, or just a way to sell tickets. Sideshow barkers at Coney Island put up The Disappearance of Dorothy Arnold as a tableau, a painted backdrop, a girl in a borrowed dress, and a crowd full of shivered wives pulling their coats tight. The press would return to her fate with morbid regularity, especially at Christmas or whenever any well-born daughter failed to come home. Each new disappearance, each fugitive society scandal, was compared and measured against the standard of Arnold's mystery. Not since the shadow of Dorothy Arnold fell across Fifth Avenue has the city held its breath so hard. Every few years, a magazine would reinvestigate, running her photograph anew beside paired stories of vanished heiresses, unreliable witnesses, and unsolved deaths. No fresh evidence ever came. New York itself hardened with every retelling. Girls don't just disappear, fathers would mutter, unless someone lets them. Police grew more cynical, less gentle, as each new case proved tangled by family secrets and the city's sheer, ungovernable size. The figure of the missing woman became, in city lore, more archetype than person, a stand-in for all the fears and failures that society could not admit. People stopped believing in a happy ending for Dorothy. The hope of someday she will turn up faded, replaced instead by a kind of resigned myth-making. There emerged in the city, in those years, an unspoken understanding that life could unravel in a moment. The illusion of invulnerability, especially for the moneyed and the known, was pierced. The tale of Dorothy Arnold reconfigured the map of social danger. It set boundaries around freedom, particularly for daughters of wealth. Who could walk out alone? Which streets must be avoided at dusk? What confidences could no longer be entrusted to friends, servants, even family? Fear, once reserved for the city's distant unfortunates, came home to roost in the marble halls of privilege. It wasn't only parents and young women who kept Dorothy's name alive. For years, every amateur sleuth, every detective and journalist with a taste for the unsolved, returned compulsively to her case. Filed boxes of yellowed newsprint, fraying with use, lived beside countless police desks. Lectures on criminology invoked her name. Her fate was a blackboard problem for students. There were theories, so many theories, filed away and posted to every new editor, always seeking the missing link, always missing the truth. By the early 1920s and into the Depression, New York streets saw wave after wave of disappearances. Each was weighed against Dorothy's absence, fueling the sense that the city itself might be the culprit, a place that chewed up innocence and cast it aside, indifferent to sorrow or searching. But none, not one, ever matched the beauty or social currency of the girl from East 79th Street. For those who survived in her orbit, Dorothy's ghost was a lesson and a warning. Servants would point out her faded photograph. "She worked harder than you'd think, that one," a housemaid told her niece. And look what it got her. The parlor maids at Brentano's, when shelving the latest bestsellers, learned to memorize her face, lest the city swallow another so quietly, so completely. In time, Dorothy's legend found its proper place in the city's collective memory. She was not just a lost girl, but a citywide memory of vanished safety, a demonstration carved deep in the bones of New York that no one, not even the best protected, could truly predict what the city might take. Over decades, her story passed from headline to warning, from warning to myth, settling finally as a lingering chill, a phrase, a caution, a shadow across Fifth Avenue whenever a new face failed to come home. Time was unkind to the Arnold family, and to the city itself, which had once throbbed with earnest searches and feverish hope. In the endless years that followed Dorothy's disappearance, New York learned to let her go, almost. She no longer belonged solely to her family or to the panicky flutters of the society press. Dorothy Arnold, vanished daughter of privilege, became the occupant of a profound emptiness, a hole that yawned wider as each search ended in nothing. But if the world moved on, the search for Dorothy never truly stopped. It simply changed shape. For decades, her name trickled through police files and private portfolios, remaining a ghostly entry in every city directory of sorrow, every national catalog of the missing. Every few years, surges of renewed interest swept through precinct houses and parlor rooms alike. Another rumor, another confession, another fleeting hope, each swallowed by the city's endless tide, each returning, year after year, to the enduring void Dorothy had left behind. From private wards to Potter's Field, no privilege could absolve the Arnolds of their powerlessness. Their wealth now counted for little more than a brief speed or comfort in the machinery of bureaucracy. No door was truly closed to them, and so every option was exhausted, every possibility pursued to its bitter end, no matter how painful, how degrading, or how hopeless it became. In her first years missing, Dorothy's photograph and anxious description traveled through the halls of every private hospital. Discreet as marble, silent as old money. Quiet, well-paid orderlies in asylums and nervous administrators in sanitariums were approached by men in fine coats or private detectives, carefully coached to avoid scandal. Have you treated a woman fitting this description, delicate, brown-haired, well-bred, perhaps suffering memory loss? Rooms were searched, ledgers cross-checked. A handful of anonymous patients were considered and dismissed. No Dorothy. The search extended outward, layer upon layer, from genteel convalescent homes on the Hudson to the cold city asylums where the lost and mad were warehoused for decades. Her name and photograph made their way into the hands of public officials, private detectives, and charity matrons alike. Tips arrived by mail, especially, invariably, from those who said they had seen her eyes in some silent figure, sewing in the dusk at a city ward. No institution, no matter how secretive, was spared the inquiry. Potter's Field on Hart Island, the city's immense burial ground for the unknown and unclaimed, received multiple visits from Pinkerton men and graying police inspectors. Row by row, grave by grave, the ledgers were examined. Female, unknown, found December 1910, body pulled from the Hudson. January, identity never established. So many possibilities, yet not one remotely fit Dorothy's physical description or age, let alone the shreds of hope her family clung to. Bodies from the East River, found weeks or months after they were lost, were examined by police surgeons and city morgue officials for months, sometimes years, after her vanishing, Each report ultimately returned with the same bleak word, negative, from city morgues to sanitariums. In the years that followed, the city's morgues became reluctant repositories of the family's hope and dread. Whenever a young, unidentified woman was found in the metropolis, whether in the ash-laden shadows beneath the L, in the narrow alleys of the Lower East Side, or on the desolate banks of the Hudson, formal identification was quietly attempted. Even the most seasoned coroners began to flinch at the sight of a dark-haired corpse, fearing another confrontation with desperate relations or the gap-toothed questions of the press. No bruise, scar, or dental marking ever matched Dorothy. Each body, each anonymous death, was another wound, another reminder of the city's merciless vastness. Some leads grew more bizarre and heartbreaking with time. Twice, word reached the Arnolds of amnesiac women in rural or upstate sanatoriums. One was an educated brunette, another claimed to have studied in Philadelphia, and both reportedly feared crowds and could not remember their name. Investigators inquired, nurses and doctors obliged, family photographs were gently compared. Each candidate was proved not to be Dorothy, but the pursuit of these false hopes became regular, almost ritualistic, for the pain-racked parents who could not surrender. As years passed, files grew thick with notations in multiple hands. No match, June 1912. Negative dental chart, August 1915. Female, matching age, not Dorothy, January 1919. By the 1930s, city officials recognized Arnold's case as one of the oldest cold investigations in memory. Junior detectives pulled the file each winter, hoping for a miracle. Few expected one. Only swirling speculation. Yet for all this industry, all this boundless, aching effort, no real trace of Dorothy Arnold, neither living nor dead, ever surfaced. The hopeful and cynical alike were compelled to invent explanations where none could be substantiated. Speculation bred endlessly. She eloped to Europe in disguise. She died in a private hospital, the family too ashamed to admit the truth. She lived out her days as a schoolteacher in California. She was murdered by a chance predator or by someone she knew and trusted. Her fate double disguised by the city's infinite anonymity. Years layered, one over the next. Old rumors faded and new ones bloomed in the cracks. Yet the enduring void always returned. Dorothy's name became the city's perpetual question and the Arnold family's unfillable ache. Her desk was never cleared. Her favorite chair at the dinner table was left unacknowledged. It was not merely a physical absence, but a gnawing chasm at the center of memory. The city, for all its size, could not produce a single true answer, leaving instead a legend suspended not on fact, but on the inexhaustible sorrow and imagination of those left behind. No stone unturned. In the literature of the city's tragedies, Dorothy's case grew to embody the ultimate mystery, one in which privilege and vigilance and relentless resource devoted over decades were no match for the abyss. In the end, what endured was the hollow where faith and futility met, every stone unturned, every hope interrogated, every institution, from ward to asylum, from morgue to bureaucrat, scoured and swept clean, leaving behind only swirling speculation and the deepening quiet that would, for all time, be mistaken for peace. The world outside was roaring with the distant thunder of war and progress, but inside the Arnold house, time had slowed into a somber procession of days indistinguishable from one another, each one a ghostly echo of everything that had once been. The halls that had once rung with laughter, the clicked certainty of instructions, and gentle disputes were now silent. The air hung with a grief that would not ease and a solitude that settled colder each year. Francis William Arnold, the patriarch who once stalked through the home with restless determination, rallying detectives, rebuffing the press, summoning every fragment of influence and resource to chase the merciless trail of rumors, was failing. The years since Dorothy's disappearance had worked upon him as surely as any disease. A man used to answers confronted daily by the unanswerable. A father for whom the idea of helplessness was as alien as any foreign land. Dorothy had been his pride, his vexation, his hope for the Arnold name. Her absence became an obsession he could never put down. The unanswered questions circled his thoughts in every idle moment. Did I press her too hard? Did I misunderstand her silence for rebellion? Mistake her ambition for insolence? Could I have forgiven? Could I have saved? He poured himself into the search for as long as mind and money allowed. Detectives were summoned, again and again, while after public interest had cooled. Pinkertons, private city men, even the odd, desperate cranks who offered psychic readings or access to forbidden city secrets. Newspapers, once kept at bay with pride and threats, he began to skin feverishly, looking for clues in every grim headline. At the end, he grudgingly embraced any method, any lead, bribery, publicity, mercy, menace, in hopes that someone, somewhere, might still break the silence. When hope failed to bear fruit, rage and suspicion filled the gap. William Arnold's relationships shattered. The staff feared his presence. His surviving children were driven off by his coldness or his outbursts. Even Mary, who had been his world's center, withdrew until their marriage became a ghost in the great house. The $1,000 reward, its notice yellowing on the bulletin boards and lost between city files, remained unclaimed, a testament to the futility of money and station when faced with the abyss. In the end, William Arnold fell ill, broken not by any misfortune that could be put to remedy, but by years of insomnia, silence, and a grief so sharp it dulled all else. When the end came, it was quiet, a winter morning, a doctor summoned not for hope but for protocol, a last glance at the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the day. He died never knowing, never suspecting how completely the city could hide a daughter, or how deep the city's silence could run. He was neither the first nor the last parent to be undone by a single unanswered question, but his sorrow felt, at least to Mary, more total than any. With William's passing, the last, thin hope for revelation faded. The fires he had kindled in pursuit of truth, those demands for investigation, those driven, scrawled letters, those endless meetings, burned out with him, leaving only embers and old papers behind. The world gave another shudder, and then moved on. Mary Arnold's decline was quiet, persistent, and cloaked against public view. Heartbroken, exhausted, she shed the last vestiges of social routine. No more teas. No more carriages rolling down the avenues. No more appearances at church or at concerts. The brilliant social animal vanished, and in her place remained only an apparition, drifting from room to room, attending to old papers, touching the dust on Dorothy's writing desk with shaking hands. She lived more in the past than in the present, finding purpose only in ritual. The daily tending of her daughter's portrait, straightening a lock of hair, whispering a name into the silence. The Arnold house, once a hub of velvet drapes and the certainty of old money, became a mausoleum. Dorothy's bedroom was kept as it had always been, her shoes lined up beneath the dressing table, her gloves folded in the top drawer, every last manuscript and rejection slip undisturbed. The room radiated yearning. Even years later, the faint scent of lilacs and ink would rise from the desk when the window was opened to release the winter chill. Mary clung to Dorothy's portrait as one might a relic of a saint, a touchstone for prayer, for questions, for the nightly ritual of remembering. Evenings in the house were long. Darkness arrived early and lasted through the hours when laughter or company might once have filled the halls. The house was kept too warm, as if by preventing a chill, the tyranny of reality might be pushed back a little further. Visitors were received only in emergencies, and even then, Mary's eyes gave nothing but the hollow shine of someone who had seen too much and wished only for oblivion. In the city beyond, louder, harder, impatient for new stories, the fate of Dorothy Arnold became a cautionary tale, then a memory, then a murmur. For Mary, there was no forgetting and no peace. Every birthday, every holiday, every change of season was a renewal of the ache. She watched the city move out her window as if it belonged to another order of beings, strangers who never knew her daughter, who did not remember, who could no longer understand that for a brief span of years, Dorothy was all promise and possibility, forever poised between youth and whatever future had been denied her. Dorothy's portrait aged with dust and sunlight, but the girl within remained untouched, forever 25, lips poised for a smile that never came. As Mary's own strength waned, her world contracted until it was no bigger than her sleepless bedroom and that picture frame. She died years after William, quietly, anonymously, her name a footnote to an old sorrow. There were no triumphs left to claim, no answers left to seek, only that unyielding bond between mother and daughter, tested and isolated by mystery, preserved by memory in a city that refused to yield its secrets. In the hush that followed, the Arnold house stood empty but for ghosts, the city outside thundering ever onward. Yet in some corners, in lonely rooms, in the dimness of fading photographs, in the quiet spaces kept for lost loved ones, Dorothy's story sang itself in mourning, the lullaby of a family's nocturne, forever unresolved, forever awaiting, forever young. More than a century has passed since Dorothy Arnold's meticulously ordinary footsteps crossed the slushy borders of Central Park South and vanished, as the city, unconscious and indifferent, swirled forward. Yet if you walk those old streets today, beneath the shadow of towers her world could not have imagined, the story lingers on the air, a whisper between a doorman and an old porter, an unclaimed face on a missing person flyer, an echo in the brittle hush of marble entryways where privilege once promised safety. Dorothy Arnold's disappearance is not just a closed file, or even a riddle for the true crime devotee. It is a presence, a fate, persisting uncertainty bell-tolling the difference between who is seen and who is lost. Historians and amateur detectives, authors and journalists, have, with each passing decade, attempted to pierce that winter veil. Their tools change, their expectations shift, but the core mystery resists all efforts. The microfilms and digital archives may fast-forward us through the blur of headlines and breathless columns, but the facts remain stubborn, elemental, and as unsatisfying in their resolution as they were in 1910. Dorothy Arnold, heiress, aspiring writer, daughter of old New York, walked out on a gray December day and slipped, in plain view, into the mist. Her last day is recounted and reconstructed with forensic zeal. We see her at Park and Tilford's, at Brentano's bookstore, parcel in hand, mild and composed. We see her turn south on Fifth Avenue, into the very heart of the city's winter commerce. Witnesses offer bright hats, easy smiles, no sign, then or later, of distress or flight. What happened next, as she merged into that tide of faces and ambitions, becomes the province of fiction, theory, and longing. The city's crowd folds her away, never to be witnessed again. That fateful afternoon sits at the heart of every retelling, inexhaustibly fresh and insolvable. Did she harbor a secret plan, a rendezvous, an escape, a final act of rebellion or sorrow? Was she ensnared by the city's darker appetites, drawn off by a stranger or misfortune so sudden that no alarm could be sounded? Perhaps Dorothy wrestled only with her own limits, literary disappointment, forbidden love, the ache of constraint. Perhaps the city, vast and uncaring, simply swallowed her as it has swallowed so many nameless before and since. The investigation's aftershocks, echoing across the years, are their own legend, society daughter gone. City searches in vain. Old brownstones were turned inside out. Ferries, hotels, asylums, city morgues, each avenue exhausted, all hope unraveled. Stories multiplied with the retelling. Telegrams from distant cities, sightings in Boston, California, even Paris. Anonymous notes arriving at police precincts and newspapers with a flavor of confession or cruelty. The case became a template for the mysteries New York would spawn for a century to come. Every vanished soul invoked against Dorothy's memory. Every new search judged against the futility of the one that came before. Some would later claim she died in a secret hospital, the victim of a botched, clandestine surgery and a mother's silent shame. Others insisted she ran away, changing her name, living out anonymous years under a sky free of Fifth Avenue's gaze. Still others, her mother, most of all, could never relinquish hope, choosing instead to believe that fate, or time, or some miracle would restore Dorothy to the world left waiting. For New York, Dorothy's story became another thread in the city's fabric of caution and lore, a warning whispered in finishing schools and at dressing tables. Don't let what happened to Dorothy happen to you. Her fate was recounted in the new media of each era, transmogrified into penny dreadfuls, radio mysteries, and, eventually, true crime podcasts. As each generation passed, her story was rescued from oblivion by those who recognized, in her vanishing, not just the fragility of privilege, but the peculiar, democratic peril that haunts every city. You might be next. Meanwhile, Dorothy's family receded and faded. Her father's obsession ended in exhaustion and death. Her mother lingered as a spectral figure, writing desk untouched, portrait perpetually youthful. The daughter she clung to forever 25. The Arnold house itself, once the somber stage of private grief and public frustration, emptied of its ghosts and became another anonymous monument on an ever-changing street. Only the dust and the faint scent of old ink remained, a mausoleum for what William Arnold called all that was precious in the world, and lost without answer. Today, Dorothy's story flickers on the edge of collective memory. Sometimes, in books about unsolved mysteries or documentaries about old New York, a sepia photograph appears, poised, intelligent, slightly guarded. She stares across the gulf of a century, not pleading for rescue but daring us to solve her, to look unblinking into the city's shadow. Each time, the details feel fresh and close, and each time, we arrive at the same, unyielding conclusion. There is, finally, no answer. Not in files, not in confessions, not in hope. There is only the silent void where Dorothy Arnold, with all her longing and rebellion and everydayness, melted into the city's vast, indifferent embrace. So what happened, truly, that winter's day on Fifth Avenue? Did Dorothy step into the arms of some secret hope or despair? Did she vanish, or did the city simply erase her, as it does so many, until only the legend remained? Dorothy Arnold's disappearance is Manhattan's undying mist, an echo, a rumor, a warning, and a question hanging in the city's air, waiting, not for an answer, but for someone to listen and, for a moment, to remember.